Chapter 687. Break, break, break. All the obstacles were so fragile. The black light that resembled a meteor shower glided past, and the sky suddenly became quiet. Many people subconsciously looked up. The 13 figures had lost their momentum and fell slowly. The black meteor shower that pierced through them stopped silently. The swords turned around and sped up, flying back into the sky again. The 13 figures trembled in the air and were turned into sieves again. Blood rained down and the 13 figures fell quickly. Yu Qianqiu stared down expressionlessly. The black light that flew back into the sky seemed to have completed its mission and returned to his sleeves like a swarm of locusts. No! Luo Qingtian roared in grief. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the 13 figures falling down. Suddenly he felt a chill in his chest. He slowly looked down and realized that his chest had been pierced by the flying swords of the 10,000 demons' nascent soul disciples due to his momentary lapse in concentration. Blood continued to gush out of the wound. All the Daluo sect disciples stared at the 13 figures falling down, and their faces instantly turned deathly pale. They suddenly felt that all the sacrifices and hard work had lost their meaning in that instant. The Daluo sect disciples were dazed, but the 10,000 demons and moon sect disciples who were in a frenzy of killing wouldn't show any mercy. For them, this was the best opportunity to kill their enemies and avenge their fellow sect members. How could they let it go? They almost didn't hesitate to kill. The flowing light dragged by the flying swords intertwined like a net, piercing through and bringing out bright red blood lotuses. The Daluo sect disciples who had persisted until now, the most elite disciples of the Daluo sect, trembled under the attacks of the flying swords. Some people fell on the spot. However, some people clenched their teeth and didn't fall because they really couldn't accept it. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and their clothes were already soaked in blood. Those people just held on and refused to fall. Their aura made the disciples of the palace of 10,000 demons and the Moon clan look at each other. No one actually went to touch them. In fact, the outcome of the battle was already decided. The battle could have lasted for a while, but it ended early because Yu Qianqiu quickly killed the 13 Daluo sect disciples who broke out of the encirclement. Yan Wuchen ignored these Daluo sect disciples who were still standing. He held a sword, stepped over the bodies and walked straight to Luo Qingtian. The two looked at each other. Zhu Xianxian, who was half kneeling beside Luo Qingtian, kept bleeding from the corner of his mouth. His intestines kept flowing out from the open wound in his stomach, and he kept stuffing them back. But they kept flowing out. Luo Qingtian looked down at him and said in a deep voice, "Elder Zhu, you are the only living elder of the Daluo sect. Stand up." "Yes, sect master." As soon as Zhu Xianxian spoke, blood came out of his mouth and his words were unclear. However, he still gritted his teeth and stood up. His body was on the verge of collapse as he looked around. His gaze landed on Yu Qianqiu, who was in the air. His eyes immediately widened, and he forcefully spat out a mouthful of blood from his throat. He raised his sword and pointed it at Yu Qianqiu. He angrily roared, "Yu Qianqiu, I curse you to die a horrible death. Even if I become a ghost, I won't let you go. I won't let you go." Yu Qianqiu stared down and said slowly, "Senior Yin, please take his head for me." With a flash of the sword, Zhu Xianxian's head was separated from his body. Yan Wuchen caught the falling head and threw it into the air. Then he kicked Zhu Xianxian's headless body away. Yu Qianqiu caught the flying head, looked at it by the hair, and threw it into the storage bag. Yan Wuchen said to Luo Qingtian indifferently, "Luo Qingtian, the Daluo sect will be removed from the cultivation world from today onwards." Luo Qingtian smiled faintly and said, "The 10,000 demons will have this day sooner or later. The Daluo sect is just a step ahead. I will wait for you down there." "Maybe." Yan Wuchen's lips curled into a sly smile. "Even if that day comes, I hope you will remember that you, the Daluo sect master, died under my feet." Luo Qingtian's eyes widened and he shouted angrily, "Old Yan, how dare you!" A disciple of the 10,000 demons dashed over and kicked the back of his knee. He shouted, "Kneel." Luo Qingtian's body swayed and he couldn't stand steadily. He almost knelt down, but he used his sword pillar to support himself. The disciple of the 10,000 demons wanted to continue kicking, but Yan Wuchen waved his hand to stop him. "Forget it, I was just joking with him." The disciple retreated angrily. Luo Qingtian struggled to stand up. Yan Wuchen narrowed his eyes and stared at him. "But everyone in the world will know that the Daluo sect master died in my hands." With a flash of the sword, a bloody wound appeared on Luo Qingtian's neck. There was no blood because the blood in his body was almost drained. His body, which had just stood up, fell backward and lay on the corpse of his fellow disciple. Luo Qingtian struggled to turn his head around. His unfocused eyes wanted to take another look at the Daluo sect, but he saw the disciples of the Daluo sect who would rather die than fall. A gratified smile appeared on his face as he recalled the distant past. At that time, these disciples had just joined the Daluo sect, and he was standing here on the steps of the Lingxiao Hall. He waved at these disciples who had just joined the Daluo sect and shouted in high spirits, "The Daluo sect welcomes you. From today onwards, the second-ranked Daluo sect will be your home. One day you will be proud to join the Daluo sect and the Daluo sect will be proud to have you join." Luo Qingtian's eyes stopped moving completely, but he still had a smile on his face. Yan Wuchen looked in the direction he was looking at. It was the group of Daluo sect disciples who were still standing. He waved his hand and said, "Kill them." Immediately, a group of 10,000 demons rushed out and cut down the Daluo sect disciples who were still standing. Yu Qianshou withdrew his gaze from below and nodded at Zhang Peng. Zhang Peng quickly gestured for the team to retreat. All the masked men in black quickly searched the corpses of the dead disciples. After they were done, they quickly regrouped and fled to the primeval forest at the foot of the mountain. Yan Wuchen's eyes flickered as he stared at these masked men in black who knew when to advance and when to retreat. He had some questions to ask Yu Qianshou, but he recalled how Yu Qianshou killed 13 Daluo sect consecrators in an instant. He had a lingering fear and swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. "Senior Yan." Yu Qianshou stared at the ground and said, "The Daluo sect still has some people on the coast of the East Sea, especially Luo Kuan, Cui Zhaofan, Li Mengbai and Zhu Zhao. If they are left alive they will be a disaster. We must eliminate the root of the problem." Yan Wuchen smiled. The 10,000 demons and the Moon sect have been prepared for this for a long time. From the moment we decided to attack the Daluo sect, we gathered 8 late-stage tribulation-passing experts and a large number of elite disciples to ambush them. The news of the Daluo sect being attacked must have reached the coast of the East Sea. Luo Kuan and the others are probably on their way to help. They might have already fought with us on the way. As for the Daluo sect disciples scattered around, we have already prepared a plan to deal with them. In short, kill them all. That's good. I hope we don't leave any survivors. Yu Qianshou waved his hand and pointed at the ruins of the Daluo sect. He smiled. The battle is over. It's time for your 2 sects to divide the Daluo sect's wealth. I won't disturb you anymore. Enjoy yourselves. Wait. Yan Wuchen stopped Yu Qianshou, who was about to leave. The latter frowned. Is there anything else, Senior Yan? Yan Wuchen's expression was solemn. Although we have taken down the Daluo sect this time, the 10,000 demons and the Moon sect have both paid a heavy price. I just want to remind you that I hope you still remember what you promised us. There's no need to doubt that. Everyone knows that I, Yu Qianshou, am a man of my word. I don't need to speak of anything else, but I speak of my word. As soon as he finished speaking, Yu Qianshou cupped his hands towards the crowd below him and said, "Farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, he'd fled towards the primeval forest below the mountain. The domineering Daluo sect had finally fallen. Luoshao Mountain, which originally belonged to the Daluo sect, was now occupied by the disciples of the Moon sect and the 10,000 demons. The disciples of the 2 sects searched everywhere for the Daluo sect's wealth. After dividing it, the Daluo sect's spiritual stone mine was also waiting for them. According to the previous agreement, the Daluo sect's wealth was divided into 3 equal parts. The Moon sect would get 1 and the 10,000 demons would get 2. Of course, there was a reason for this. The 10,000 demons sent out twice as many people as the Moon sect. It was the same for the experts at the end of the tribulation stage who were responsible for the main attack. Following the principle of more work, more pay, the 10,000 demons should get the lion's share. There was no doubt about that. Although the 2 sects had paid a heavy price for this battle, they had also gained a lot. The wealth that the Daluo sect had accumulated for thousands of years was not a small number. In the blink of an eye, it had become someone else's wedding dress. When the news of the Daluo sect's disappearance spread, the entire Wuxia cultivation world was shocked. Such a big thing couldn't be hidden even if they wanted to. In fact, when the 2 sects mobilized a large number of people, it attracted the attention of many other sections. It was just that no one expected the 2 sects to attack the Daluo sect. Even the Daluo sect itself didn't expect this, let alone other sections. For the various sects in the Wuxia cultivation world, this was unbelievable, especially for the orthodox sections. No one expected that the Moon sect, which was made up of a group of women and ranked 3rd on the orthodox sects, would collude with the 10,000 demons who ranked first on the orthodox sects, to attack the Daluo sect and the Daluo sect, which ranked second on the orthodox sects. Then came the news that the Moon sect and the 10,000 demons had joined forces to ambush Luo Kuan and a large number of the Daluo sect's people who had returned from the coast of the East Sea. Led by Luo Kuan, for masters were killed. None of the Daluo sect disciples who followed him escaped. All of them died in battle. That wasn't the end. The Daluo sect disciples who were scattered outside were ambushed on the same day. Even the disciples who were doing business in the Wu family and the Hundred Flowers Valley couldn't escape. They were lured out and killed. The Daluo sect's businesses outside were all forcibly taken over by the 10,000 demons and the Moon sect. As the saying goes, a centipede dies but it doesn't fall down. The Daluo sect was deeply rooted and had a large number of people. Under such a large-scale purge, many people still escaped. But unexpectedly, the Hong gang and Qing gang, which usually didn't have any conflicts with the large sects, also took action quickly. They hunted down the remaining disciples of the Daluo sect everywhere. Under the joint efforts of the three forces, almost all traces of the Daluo sect were wiped out. Chapter 688. Conspiracy. All the sects doubtlessly suspected that this was a conspiracy that had been planned for a long time. Just imagine, the three forces joined forces within a day. If it was not a conspiracy, what else could it be? However, the strength of the Daluo sect, which was ranked second on the righteous path, was undeniable. Was the Daluo sect really wiped out in a day? On Mount Luoshao, no one stopped the guests who came from all directions. All the sects sent their competent people to personally verify it. When the people who left passed by the people who came, they all shook their heads at the latter with a sigh. Soon, when the people who came later landed on Mount Luoshao, they understood what the former meant. It was a scene of devastation. The originally majestic three main halls had become ruins. The mountain top was dyed dark red with blood. There were corpses everywhere. It was almost impossible to find a place to stand. It made people wonder if this was really the world-famous Daluo sect. Rats crawled among the broken limbs. Flocks of vultures, eagles, and crows were not afraid of the people coming and going at all. They flew away in fright when they saw the people coming, but then they flew back without hesitation. They trampled on the corpses, pecked and tore them apart. This place had become their paradise. There were also vultures, eagles, and crows that came from all directions. They began to peel off piles of white bones. Dongfang Chang'eo was personally ordered by the sect leader to check and verify. He stood on a broken stone tablet. Below the stone tablet was a broken horizontal board. Although he did not read the words on the horizontal board, he could still guess that it was Lingxiao Hall from the broken handwriting. He wanted to find Luo Qingtian's body and bury it. After all, Luo Qingtian was the leader of a sect. Everyone belonged to one of the top sects in the righteous path. There was no reason for his body to be exposed and be trampled by those feathered beasts. However, he could not tell which body was Luo Qingtian's because this place had long been trampled by a group of feathered beasts. He was famous when he was alive, but what about after his death? The smell of blood in the air had yet to disperse, and the gloomy wind had yet to blow it away. It was as if there were countless spirits of the dead wandering around the mountain peak and weeping. Occasionally, someone would fly over, startling the group of feathered beasts. After looking around and confirming that the Origin Immortal sect had indeed been razed to the ground, no one dared to linger. Cupping their fists to Dongfang Chang'eo, they bid their farewells and flew off into the distance. This wasn't a good place to chat. Dongfang Chang'eo stood on top of the broken monolith, looking at those figures who were leaving with an emotionless gaze. At this moment, he suddenly thought of Yu Qianqiu's poem that was widely spread among the various countries. His gaze lingered on the clouds and dogs in the distant heaven and earth. He sighed in his heart and slowly recited in a deep tone, riding the sword to traverse the vast heaven and earth, white bones like a mountain of startled birds. The world is like a tide and people are like water. How many people in Jianghu return? How many people in Jianghu will return? The lingering sound lingered on the mountain peak, but the person on the broken tablet was nowhere to be seen. A figure disappeared into the distance. The Origin Immortal sect had been razed to the ground, and the entire cultivation world was in turmoil. The slaughter of the 10,000 demons and the Moon clan was unanimously criticized by the entire righteous path, especially the Moon clan. They had become traitors in the eyes of the righteous sects and received the most intense condemnation. The diabolism all remained silent. To them it was a good thing that the righteous path had suffered a heavy blow. However, the 10,000 demons had made such a big move at such a sensitive time when enemies were waiting for them. They didn't dare to flatter them. However, the destruction of the Origin Immortal sect had already become an established fact. Other than condemning them, what else could they do? Would any sect be willing to take revenge for the Origin Immortal sect? To the various sects, only the Origin Immortal sect that was still alive was valuable. The destroyed Origin Immortal sect could only support them on moral grounds and would have nothing to do with them. It was true that the Moon Clan was being condemned, but it had naturally become the second largest sect of the righteous path. At the same time, it had made a fortune that was equivalent to hundreds of years of accumulation for the Moon Clan. Among those condemning sects, how many sects were actually secretly envious of the Moon Clan? Only the victors had the right to establish themselves in the cultivation world. Even if the losers didn't die, it would be difficult for them to establish themselves. This was the reality of the cultivation world. The incessant condemnation stopped abruptly after a piece of news came out. It was said that this time, the 10,000 demons and the Moon Clan had joined forces to destroy the Origin Immortal sect because Yu Qianqiu had taken revenge for Ong Guangsung's former master. The entanglement between them had been spread clearly. Perhaps even Hao Sansi himself did not expect that he, who was not famous in the cultivation world when he was alive, would become famous in the cultivation world more than 20 years after his death. Even the righteous sects, including the Fuxian Island, all remained silent. There were even some sects that had been condemning Yu Qianqiu before, but now they suddenly changed their tune and started to praise Yu Qianqiu for how he respected his master, how he endured humiliation to avenge his master, and how he was a role model for the disciples of other sections. As for the victim, the Origin Immortal sect, they were gradually described as greedy villains who killed for treasures. They deserved to be destroyed. In the world of cultivation, strength was always more useful than a glib tongue. History had proven that this was an irrefutable truth. The truth was always on the side of the victors. The Origin Immortal sect would be engraved on the pillar of humiliation, and Yu Qianqiu would be a good disciple who endured humiliation to avenge his master. The internal strife in the cultivation world of Huaxia made the sects nervous. They were worried that because of the internal strife, the Wuxia Island would take the opportunity to attack. However, what surprised the Huaxia Cultivation Alliance was that the Wuxia Island had been very quiet during this time. There wasn't even the slightest sign of provocation. They obediently played their part. This made people feel that they were worried about something or waiting for something. It gave people a feeling of silence before an explosion. In fact, Bai Changchun's reappearance in the cornucopia made the forces of the various countries behave a lot. The old man's terrifying skills made the Soul Formation Realm lords of the various countries unforgettable once again. It was better to wait until he went to the East Holy Land. Anyway, the day of the East Holy Land's opening was not far away. There was no need to provoke Bai Changchun at this time. The wind was bleak, the water was cold, and the warrior was gone, never to return. At the border of the west, war drums thundered and shook the heavens and bugles sounded. Millions of brave soldiers moved, war horses galloped, and the army began to gather in the clouds. The fierce west wind. Beside the tall platform, the commander's flag with the word "Sure" fluttered in the wind. On both sides of the platform, there were 3 large drums that looked like round tables. In front of each drum, there were 2 burly men with bare arms, waving sticks and beating the drums. The 6 drums vibrated at the same time, and the deafening sound pierced through the clouds. Generals quickly came to the front of the platform to receive their orders. On both sides of the platform there were 6 rows of generals and each row had 20 soldiers. All of them were clad in armor, their faces solemn and murderous. The 6 thunderous drums suddenly stopped, and the rumbling sound echoed in the air. Outside the gate surrounded by high fences, there was a hua-hua sound of armor. Shi Wenguang held a long sword at his waist, and walked in with a majestic gait. His armor shone brightly, and the bright red cloak behind him looked like it was dyed with blood. Behind him, there were 2 personal guards following closely behind him. However, there were 2 rows of 6 generals and a total of 12 generals accompanied him. Shirin Tian was impressively among them. A line of 15 people walked into the field in an orderly manner. After the 12 generals escorted Shi Wenguang to the platform, they scattered to both sides, and stood in front of the 12 rows of generals below the platform. Shi Wenguang held his sword and stood in the middle of the platform, looking down with a pair of fierce eyes. The generals who were qualified to stand under the platform were all famous generals of Huaxia who had followed him through hundreds of battles. Which one of them didn't climb out of a pile of corpses? But today, greetings, Grand Marshal. More than 100 generals shouted in unison, and their voices reverberated in all directions. All of them knelt down on one knee. Shi Wenguang swept his gaze around, and raised his hand to signal everyone to stand up. He then took a deep breath and shouted in a deep voice, "The Li dynasty is cruel and heartless. Corrupt officials run amok and prey on the common people. For the country and the people, we have fought bloody battles at the borders for many years, but in exchange we can't return to our homes. How many people have broken up their families? Although we are brave men, we also care about our country and the world. We hope that the common people can live in peace and prosperity. This is the duty of us iron-blooded soldiers. But we can't survive and we can't even protect our wives and children. Are we supposed to protect the Li dynasty where treacherous officials and corrupt officials gather? Are we supposed to be loyal to the Li dynasty's imperial power that makes the common people unable to live in peace? No, no, no." The generals and the surrounding soldiers raised their arms and shouted in unison, and their momentum was astonishing. "Although my family is reunited now, it's hard to erase the hatred in my heart that I've exchanged for a lifetime of military service. Hatred, hatred, hatred." Shi Wenguang cried out in pain. Then he said loudly, "Now I'm willing to repay the people's kindness of raising me with my hot-bloodedness, overthrow the Li dynasty's tyranny and return peace to the world. Are all of you willing to follow Shi Wenguang to conquer the world and make new contributions?" With a whoosh, the generals below the stage knelt down on one knee again. They cupped their hands together and shouted, "We're willing to follow the great marshal with our lives. We'll go through fire and water, and we'll do anything to overthrow the Li dynasty's tyranny and return peace to the world." "All right," Shi Wenguang shouted, "all generals listen up." Everyone immediately stood up and listened to the orders solemnly. Shi Wenguang's gaze swept past everyone and shouted again, "Yanping Wengao, where are you?" Two generals quickly walked out from the ranks and cupped their fists as they said in unison, "We're here." Unexpectedly, Shi Wenguang stared at them coldly from the stage. He waved his hand and said with a sneer, "Tie them up." The two generals were dumbfounded. Before they could react, they were immediately pressed to the ground by the ferocious soldiers who rushed out from both sides. Their helmets and swords were taken off and they were tied up. The generals on both sides stood silently and stared coldly at the two people tied up on the ground. No one pleaded for them as if they weren't surprised at all. "Why is the great marshal like this? Did I break any military rules?" The two of them struggled and shouted on the ground. Their faces were covered in dirt, and they were forced to kneel on the ground by the ferocious soldiers. "Why ask when you already know the answer?" Shi Wenguang stroked his beard and said indifferently with a cold gaze, "Although the two of you have followed me for many years, you're actually spies sent by the Li family to spy on me. In the past, I didn't touch you two because I wanted the Li family to be at ease. Now that the army is about to go on a punitive expedition against the Li family, how can I leave two spies by my side to ruin things? It just so happens that the army is about to go on a punitive expedition and needs human heads as sacrifices. I'll have to trouble the two of you." "Great Marshal, you're being wronged. Marshal, you're being wronged." The two of them struggled and cried out for their innocence. Unfortunately, Shi Wenguang didn't even care about them. Instead, he waved his arm and shouted, "Bring them in." There was a commotion outside the gate and hundreds of soldiers who were tied up were pushed in. Chapter 689. All of these people had stones stuffed into their mouths and had hemp ropes covering their mouths. None of them were able to speak. Their faces were filled with fear as they whimpered, as if they wanted to say something. However, Shi Wenguang had no intention of listening to what they had to say. All of them were forced to kneel on the ground. Other than the people who held them down, there was also a red-robed executioner with a demon-headed blade standing behind each of them. All the generals looked at these 500 people and knew what was going to happen next. However, none of them did anything. Not a single one of them came out to plead for mercy. This was because they knew that these 500 soldiers were the same as Yanping and Wengao. They were all spies planted by the imperial court within the army. It was just that their ranks were not as high as the two spies. Usually they were not touched because they did not want to alert the imperial court. But now that the army was about to move out, the Grand Marshal only needed to give the order to capture them all. Looking at this situation, Yanping and Wengao's face instantly became extremely pale. They understood everything. It seemed that their every move was already in the grasp of the Grand Marshal. Today was the day to capture them all. "Marshal, spare me." Yanping struggled to stand up and cried out to the tall and sturdy figure on the stage. Two soldiers raised their thick blades and smashed them on his calf. Kacha. The sound of bones breaking could be heard clearly. Yan Ping let out a painful groan and knelt down again. Wen Gao, who was also struggling, saw this scene and had a desolate expression on his face. He shouted towards the stage, "Marshal! Great General! This subordinate knows his mistake. I beg of you, Great General, for the sake of this subordinate's years of fighting and risking his life for you, please forgive this subordinate this time. This subordinate knows his mistake, Great General." The two soldiers who were holding him immediately swung the backs of their thick swords, directly striking his mouth. With two pa-pa sounds, blood mixed with broken teeth sprayed out. His mouth was immediately badly mutilated, and he could no longer speak loudly. Shi Wenguang held onto his sword and stared at the two of them in silence. After a long time he slowly said, "After the two of you die, bless my army from the underworld. Since the two of you have followed me into battle for so many years, when I conquer the world, I will treat your family well in the name of military martyrs who died in battle. Military law is merciless. The merciful do not command soldiers." Shirin Tian. Shirin Tian stepped forward and cupped his fists. "Here." Shi Wenguang gently waved his hand and said, "Send the two generals on their way for me." "Yes, sir." Shirin Tian threw off the white robe behind him, turned around and walked towards Yan Ping and Wen Gao, then took over the broadsword from the red-clothed executioner. Shi Wenguang stretched out his hand, and someone immediately handed him a red lot. Shi Wenguang picked up the red lot with 2 fingers and threw it off the stage. He shouted, "Sacrifice to the flag cut." Shirin Tian sends the 2 generals off. Shirin Tian bowed to Yan Ping and Wen Gao with his saber in his hand. He then walked in between the two and swung his saber left and right. Pu piu, sounds could be heard as 2 steaming heads fell to the ground. Shirin Tian's white robe was dyed red by the blood he spat out. Shirin Tian returned the blade back to the executioner and returned to his position. Soon after, more than 500 saber flashes could be seen. Pu piu, sounds could be heard as more than 500 heads fell to the ground. In an instant, blood splattered everywhere and the smell of blood filled the air. The generals had been fighting for many years and were used to seeing life and death. These 500 heads did not even have the qualifications to make them frown. In front of the plateau halfway up the mountain, Yu Qianqiu stood quietly under a large tree, calmly looking at the mountain deity temple at the foot of the mountain. The strong sunlight shone on his face, causing his expression to change unpredictably, as if his heart was not as calm as he looked on the surface. The Qin clan and Hong clan now included all the rogue cultivators in the entire Chinese cultivation world. Their members were spread all over China, making them the best place to gather information. Compared to the 100 Charms Enchantress Pink sect, they were much more flexible. Most importantly, these 2 clans were all under his command, and he could command them as he pleased. It was not like the time when he needed to gather information from the Pink sect. After knowing that Shi Wenguang's army was about to make a move, he had been sitting here, receiving all kinds of information from all over the world. Shi Wenguang could handle the war, so he didn't need to worry about it. What he paid attention to was the reaction of the various sects in the cultivation world when Shi Wenguang's army made a move. To him, there were 2 battlefields in China. The secular world was Shi Wenguang's and the Li dynasty's battlefield. On the other hand, his battlefield was the cultivation world. He didn't allow any sects in the cultivation world to intervene in the secular world's war. Once he found any abnormal signs, he would do his best to put an end to it. Even Fuxian Island couldn't. After struggling, working hard, and going crazy in the cultivation world, he already had enough confidence to make the so-called world's #1 sect, Fuxian Island, shrink back. A figure flashed and landed on the plateau in front of the room. Gu Qingyun strode to the back of Yu Qianqiu, and Yu Qianqiu asked without turning his head, "Is there any new news?" Shi Wenguang's million-strong army has already made a move. Before Gu Qingyun could finish, Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around and looked at him asking, "How's the situation?" Hong Gang and Qin Gang are paying close attention to the movement. Currently, the various sects in the cultivation world have no reaction, and they seem to be waiting for Fuxian Island's reaction. The strange thing is that Wuxia Empire is Fuxian Island's exclusive property. Shi Wenguang revolted, but Fuxian Island has no reaction. "It's a little hard to understand," Gu Qingyun said with a puzzled expression. "There's nothing strange about it. I've already warned Fuxian Island, so they won't dare to act rashly for now." Yu Qianqiu casually said and asked, "How's the situation over at Shi Wenguang's side?" Gu Qingyun was a little surprised as he didn't expect him to even dare to warn Fuxian Island. He then said with a smile, "This person is really good at fighting and his subordinates are all peerless generals who have been through hundreds of battles. In addition to the million-strong elite under him, the imperial court's troops are no match for him. I reckon the Li dynasty is already restless. Yu Qianzhou said with an "oh," and asked with a smile, "What's the situation?" Gu Qingyun explained, "The Huaxia Empire has 6 million troops, and the Zhou State, Wei State and Ping State generals are in charge of one division each. Each division has about 2 million troops." In reality, the movement of Shi Wenguang's army had already alerted the imperial court, and they had already ordered the Wei State general in the east to personally lead his army to defend. The Wei State general, on the other hand, did a good job. He led 1.2 million troops, and once he arrived at the west, he sent out 300,000 troops to guard the Black Wind Gap stronghold. This place is easy to defend and hard to attack, so he thought it would be foolproof. Who knew that Shi Wenguang had already secretly sent out 50,000 elite troops before he sent out his army? They went through untold hardships and crossed the mountains to lie in ambush behind the stronghold. Once the army neared the Black Wind Gap, Shi Wenguang sent his son Shi Tian to lead 100,000 troops to attack. They worked together with the 50,000 elite troops that infiltrated the stronghold. In less than a day, they took down the Black Wind Gap and opened up the path to the Central Plains. The people he picked didn't disappoint him, so Yu Qianzhou was more or less relieved. He said with a smile, "All's fair in war, as expected of the famous great General Shi. I didn't expect Shi Tian to be the one who made the greatest contribution." Gu Qingyun nodded and continued, "After Shi Wenguang took down the Black Wind Gap, he ordered 3 generals to lead 300,000 vanguard troops to attack the main force of the Wei State general from 3 different directions. The remaining 900,000 troops of the Wei State general were utterly defeated, and the Wei State general was no longer in the mood to fight, so he fled in panic. After that, Shi Wenguang's 3 vanguard troops advanced with irresistible force. In just a short 10 days they took down 3 residences and 18 cities in the west, completely clearing away all the obstacles in their way to the Central Plains. The next step is to fight the vast land of the Central Plains. The wealth, population and food of the Huaxia Empire will all leave the Central Plains. It would be strange if the Li dynasty is not anxious." Yu Qianzhou laughed heartily. Amidst his happiness he frowned and muttered, "Shi Wenguang's offensive is ferocious. I'm afraid it will force some people to take desperate measures. You and Hong Qi must keep a close eye on the movements of the sections. If there's anything wrong, tell me immediately so that I can deal with it." The news of Shi Wenguang's rebellion spread throughout the entire Huaxia Empire in no time. The whole of Huaxia was in a state of shock. And within the borders of the whole country, the imperial court began to forcefully recruit a large number of able-bodied men to serve in order to block Shi Wenguang's attack. In fact, this was also a last resort. The imperial court would never have thought that the Wei State general, who was equally as famous as the pillar of the state general, could not even withstand the attack of the former for a month. 1.2 million troops. They were defeated just like that. What else could they do but recruit able-bodied men? From the capital of Huaxia to the rest of the country, all the high-ranking officials and nobles began to panic. This was because these people with vested interests were originally attached to the current regime, absorbing the wealth of the people. Once the regime was overthrown, their good days would come to an end. Not to mention good days, whether or not they would be able to keep their lives in the future was still a problem. It was not like Yu Qianzhou's previous world, where once they were full of money, they could easily escape to a foreign country due to special circumstances and continue to live a carefree life. Also, due to some special reasons, no one would really pursue and punish them. So, who cares if your country is good or bad? What can they do to me? What does it have to do with me? Although these people usually lived a luxurious life, they were not as stupid as the pigs in the pigsty. They knew more than the common people. It was fine if the Huaxia Empire's army was used to bully and extort unarmed people. But if they wanted to fight against Shi Wenguang's army, which had been fighting bloody battles at the borders for years, that was a joke. It was no different from courting death. For a moment, everyone panicked. In the heavily guarded palace in the capital of Huaxia, His Majesty flew into a rage during the court meeting, scolding the Wei State general for being an idiot. However, throwing a tantrum was one thing, but he still had to think of a solution. Thus he pointed to the Ping State general. As for the Ping State general, he used the excuse that he and his men had to protect the important areas of the capital region, so it was not convenient for him to move out easily. In the end, the flustered and exasperated His Majesty flung his sleeves and left. Then he found the current imperial preceptor and asked the power behind the Li dynasty for help. Chapter 690. They finally made a move. Feng Xiangtian sighed helplessly. The state preceptor of the Wuxia Empire, who was also a disciple of supporting Xian Island, came back to ask for help. In fact, there was no need for him to come back to report. Supporting Xian Island already knew about Shi Wenguang's rebellion. Since Yu Qianzhou said it himself, supporting Xian Island had sent people to secretly monitor it. The so-called secret surveillance was to secretly find an opportunity to assassinate Shi Wenguang and his son. As long as they did it secretly, even if Yu Qianzhou came looking for supporting Immortal Island, supporting Immortal Island could just push the matter aside and say that they didn't do it and that someone might have deliberately framed them to sow discord. Don't think that the world's #1 sect wouldn't do shady things. With the support of strength, shady things would be even more secretive. However, the people they sent reported that Shi Wenguang had many crossing tribulation experts protecting him. The strangest thing was that these crossing tribulation experts were unfamiliar faces. They had never seen them in the Wuxia cultivation world. The higher-ups of Fuxian Island immediately thought of a possibility, which was that Yu Qianzhou had borrowed manpower from another nation's forces. It should be known that the other countries had a lord overseeing them. The lord who could control a territory was basically at the spirit-severing intermediate stage. This wasn't something that supporting Xian Island dared to act recklessly. The spirit-severing experts hadn't come yet. If they attracted them, it would be too late. Thus the assassins were called back. Inside the house, a group of elders of supporting Xian Island gathered. Guan Weiwu lowered his head and didn't say anything. The others glanced at Fernan from time to time. Fernan's current situation in supporting Xian Island was very delicate. Perhaps it was more appropriate to describe it as awkward. If it wasn't for Ma Jiugu's protection, he would have lost his position. We shouldn't have expelled Yu Qianzhou from the sect. At that time he had already displayed outstanding cultivation talent. But what did we do? We are ashamed to face the ancestors of the supporting Immortal Island. Elder Mo of the Equipment Refining Pavilion, who was sitting beside Ferdinand, grumbled softly. Feng Xiangtian glared at him coldly. If he was to be held accountable for expelling Yu Qianzhou from the sect, he, as the sect leader, would have to bear the blame because he was the one who insisted on expelling Yu Qianzhou from the sect. The reason was naturally because Yu Qianzhou, a mere disciple, dared to challenge the prestige of a sect leader like him. Elder Mo's grumbling was no different from blaming him, the sect master. The Cultivation Pavilion's principal elder, O Sihai, immediately shouted, "We are discussing how to deal with this matter, not letting you fart overnight." He came out to smooth things over. Then he looked around and said, "This Yu Qianzhou first gathered the 10,000 demons and the Moon Clan to wipe out the Daluo sect. Now he wants to take over the throne in the secular world. What is he trying to do?" No one could answer this question. There was a short silence in the room. After a while, Dongfang Chang'ao said slowly, "I heard that Yu Qianzhou killed Luo Guang and 13 other masters in the final phase of the tribulation passing stage in the Daluo sect. I don't know if it is true or not." O Sihai's face twitched and he said in a low voice, "Since he can be called the #1 master below the soul formation stage by the masters in the final phase of the soul formation stage, he must have the ability to do so." Then he asked Feng Xiangtian, "Sect leader, what do the Tianxin Pavilion's masters think?" Feng Xiangtian shook his head slightly and said, "What they mean is that they have no opinion on any decision we make." In fact, what Guan Dinghai meant was that if there was no other way they could only bear with it for now and give up this fat piece of meat in the secular world. Although the consecrators had this intention, he couldn't tell the others that the consecrators had also given in. This would damage the dignity of the consecrators. Everyone looked at each other and didn't say it out loud. They already knew what the masters meant. In the end it was O Sihai who said, "I think it's fine to give up the imperial power in the secular world. Just take it as a stopgap measure. If there is a chance in the future we can take it back. What do you think?" It wasn't good to let the old masters take the blame, and it wasn't good to let the sect leader take the blame. As an elder of the Cultivation Pavilion, his weight was lower than the other two but higher than the others. He was the best candidate to take the blame. This was called knowing one's own limits. Everyone shook their heads and expressed that they had no opinion. Feng Xiangtian heaved a sigh of relief and sighed. "Since it is everyone's decision, then let it be. There is no need to send the imperial advisor to the Li dynasty. Bear with it for now and don't have any conflict with Yu Qianzhou. Everyone is dismissed. Go to your own things." The news of Yu Qianzhou wiping out the Daluo sect not only spread throughout the Wuxia cultivation world, but also to the various countries. The cultivators of the various countries didn't care about it since it had nothing to do with them. However, they felt that it was in line with that butcher's style. TSK. wiping out nearly 20,000 disciples. A butcher is a butcher. In the Spirit Fang Valley, in Lu Yanqing's personal alchemy room in the medicine hut, the Allure Beauty and Yin Yu were helping Lu Yanqing organize the various spiritual herbs. Lu Yanqing stood at the side with a solemn expression and looked at the two busy women. Suddenly she said, "I have some news about Yu Qianqiu in the Wuxia cultivation world. Do you want to hear it?" The two women were stunned. After looking at each other, they nodded slightly, indicating that they wanted to hear it. Lu Yanqing immediately frowned and told the two about Yu Qianqiu wiping out the Daluo sect. Yin Yu was shocked. She didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to kill so many people. The Allure Beauty was in a daze for a long time. Her eyes gradually became moist. He had finally avenged her and accomplished what she wanted to do but couldn't. In the bamboo forest of Utopia, Yu Qianqiu quietly appeared in the courtyard. Just as he walked around, he suddenly heard someone ask in the bamboo house, "Who is it? Someone lives here?" Yu Qianqiu was stunned, but when he saw Shui Qingkong walking out of the house, he suddenly realized that he had almost forgotten that Bai Sujin's uncle was still here. So he smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Senior Shui, are you used to living here?" "So it's the leader." Shui Qingkong quickly bowed. He had stayed in Utopia for a long time, so he naturally knew Yu Qianqiu's position in Utopia. After standing up, he replied, "It's very quiet here. It's a good place to live. I should thank the leader for taking me in. May I know what instructions the leader has for coming here?" Yu Qianqiu pointed behind and said, "Nothing much. Go to the grave at the back and pay your respects." Shui Qingkong was slightly surprised. He hadn't come to pay his respects for so many years. Why did he suddenly come today? There must be a special reason. Thus he cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll go out and take a walk. Please help yourself, leader." Yu Qianqiu smiled and nodded, watching him leave. Then he looked around the quiet bamboo forest and could not help but feel a little emotional. The bamboo forest and bamboo houses here were built by him and by Sujin. Back then, there were only the two of them in the whole of Utopia. After reminiscing for a while, he stepped on the thick bamboo leaves and walked to the back of the bamboo house. The back of the bamboo house was empty, and a grave stood there conspicuously. The surroundings were very clean, and there were new marks on the grave. There was not even a single weed. Clearly someone had cleaned it often. Yu Qianqiu walked to the front of the tombstone, slowly knelt down and kowtowed 3 times. Then he sat on the ground and leaned against the tombstone with a smile, saying, "Old man, I haven't come to see you for a long time. Don't be angry. It's not that I forgot or didn't want to see you, but that I didn't avenge you, so I don't have the face to see you. Today I'm here to tell you good news. The Daluo sect was destroyed by me and I killed the person who killed you. Although it took me more than 20 years to avenge you, I finally avenged you, right? Don't nag at me anymore." He raised his hand and took out a head from his storage bag. He raised it and shook it. "Old man, do you see this? This is Zhu Xianxian who killed you. I brought his head. Originally, I wanted to use it as a memorial to you, but I think you don't want to see this face, so I might as well just throw it away and save you the trouble." As he spoke, a green flame appeared in his palm, instantly burning the head to ashes. He took out a wine flask, opened the lid and placed it on the ground. Clear wine flowed out, and the fragrance of wine wafted in the surroundings. "Old man, it's been a long time since I drank with you." Yu Qianqiu also took out a jar of wine and drank it heartily. He leaned against the tombstone and kept muttering to himself, recounting his experiences over the years to the person who had died many years ago. "Old man, I haven't drunk with you for a long time." Yu Qianqiu also took out a jar of wine and drank it to his heart's content. He leaned against the tombstone and kept muttering to himself, recounting his experiences over the years to the person who had died many years ago. He recounted all the ups and downs he had experienced over the years. He even grumbled about the grievances that outsiders couldn't see, as if he was a child complaining to an adult. Leaning against the tombstone, his expression alternated between excitement, depression, pride, and sobbing. He seemed deranged like a shameless madman. Towards the end he actually started crying. He hugged the wine jar and drank the wine, crying bitterly. His face was covered with water and it was hard to tell if it was wine or tears. He was still drinking the wine and it was a very strong kind of wine. If outsiders were to see this, who would believe that this was the scum of the cultivation world who did all kinds of evil? Who would believe that this was the butcher of the cultivation world who killed people like flies? As the smell of wine filled the air, a bright moon rose above the bamboo forest. He was still muttering weakly. A graceful white figure gently walked over. Under the illumination of the moonlight, Bai Sujin's gentle and peerless face revealed a pitiful expression as she silently looked at him. Shui Qingkong only came back after dark. She thought that Yu Qianqiu must have left, but when she came back she heard him crying bitterly behind her. She was shocked and immediately went to the Misty Palace to inform Bai Sujin. That was why Bai Sujin appeared here. In a daze, Yu Qianqiu vaguely saw a white-robed person standing in the moonlight. He struggled to open his eyes, and when he saw that it was Bai Sujin, he immediately woke up. He picked up the wine jar and looked at it. He muttered, "Damn it. It's not easy being a cultivator. I've drunk so much but I can't even get drunk." In the blink of an eye, he returned to his playful and angry self. Chapter 691. The hint of pity on Bai Sujin's face also disappeared the moment he stood up. A gentle smile appeared on her face as she asked softly, "Why did you come here alone?" "Let me hug you first, then I will tell you." Yu Qianqiu revealed a sinister smile. Bai Sujin pointed at his wet body and shook her head with a faint smile. Then, she gently opened her arms and took the initiative to hug him. Yu Qianqiu laughed and pulled her into his arms. He buried his head in her soft neck and enjoyed a deep breath, inhaling the faint fragrance of her body into his lungs. He murmured, "It's so comfortable. Your chest is also very elastic. I will find a chance to peel it off and see." Bai Sujin also hugged him gently, allowing him to say frivolous words without saying anything. In the bamboo forest under the moonlight, the two tightly hugged each other as if they never wanted to be separated. The only inharmonious scene was the lonely grave on the side. After a long time, Yu Qianqiu was so comfortable that he almost fell asleep standing up. Suddenly, he heard Bai Sujin ask softly in his ear, "Have you come to pay respects to your master?" "Yes." Yu Qianqiu was too lazy to reply at this time, so he softly answered through his nose. "Have you avenged your master?" Bai Sujin asked. "Yes." Yu Qianqiu buried his head in her neck, still motionless. "Killed many people?" Bai Sujin asked hesitantly. Yu Qianqiu raised his head and pushed her away. He looked at her face and asked curiously, "How do you know?" Bai Sujin smiled sweetly and her eyes flashed. She wanted to say that she guessed it from his actions in front of Hao Sanxi's grave, but she changed her words and said in a low voice, "I remember that there are many people in the Daluo sect. If you really took revenge you must have killed many people." Yu Qianqiu said in his heart, "Bosom friend." He shrugged his shoulders indifferently and pulled her hand, "Let's go for a walk." Bai Sujin gently pulled him back and shook her head. "It's rare for you to come back. You should go and accompany Chu Pinger." Yu Qianqiu glanced at her and let go of her hand. He took out a jar of wine and popped a small hole near the bottom. The sparkling wine flowed out in a thin stream. He walked to the front of the grave and placed the jug of wine on the tombstone. He chuckled and said, "Old man, I won't accompany you anymore. Drink slowly." The wine flowed down the tombstone. Then, without saying anything, he walked to Bai Sujin's side and forcefully dragged her away. They walked hand in hand through the bamboo forest and slowly walked forward. They didn't know how long they had walked, but they didn't say a word. After they walked to the lake, they sat down on the grass by the lake. Yu Qianqiu lay down lazily with his head on Bai Sujin's thigh and looked at the stars in the sky. He didn't know when he took a bite of grass and chewed it. Seeing that he was chewing grass so happily, Bai Sujin thought of cows eating grass. So she kept pulling out grass and piling it on his stomach until he looked like a big belly woman. She couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. She was playful and kept burying him with grass. Yu Qianqiu was distracted and didn't notice that he was covered with grass. He looked at the countless twinkling stars in the sky, but his mind was thinking about his women. Finally he thought of Yanyu and was slightly startled. He wondered how she and the Enchantress of 100 Charms were doing in the Lingfang Valley. Bai Sujin also noticed his abnormality and finally asked, "What's wrong?" Yu Qianqiu came back to his senses and immediately found that he was covered with grass. He rolled his eyes and said, "Beauty, are you afraid of being discovered by others, so you want to destroy my body to destroy the evidence?" He reached out his hand to tickle Bai Sujin's armpit. Bai Sujin twisted her body and giggled like a silver bell. "No, no." Yu Qianqiu let her go, but he pointed to his face and said with a sinister smile, "Murdering an adulterer is a heinous crime. I punish you by kissing me." "What an unreasonable punishment. Let me think about whether I should execute it or not." Bai Sujin tilted her head and thought for a while. Then she gently lowered her head and slowly pressed her soft red lips on Yu Qianqiu's forehead. She stayed for a while before leaving. Yu Qianqiu smiled proudly and sat up. He said, I'm leaving. Don't tell others that I've been back. Bai Suzhen looked at him quietly for a while and nodded slightly. Yu Qianqiu let out a self-deprecating laugh, hugged Bai Suzhen's face, and gave her a kiss before vanishing. Bai Suzhen sat alone by the lake for a long time. She looked at the moon in the sky with a gentle smile from time to time and kept fiddling with the pile of grass. Finally, she picked up a pile of grass and sprinkled it all over the sky. Then she slowly rose into the sky and flew through the drifting grass, like Chang'e flying to the moon, towards the misty palace high up in the sky. Shuntian Island under the moonlight had a unique charm. The moonlight and starlight were also reflected in the boundless lake, which made people mistakenly think that Shuntian Island was floating in the vast sea of stars. It was a beautiful sight. Furong and Ziyi would never get tired of looking at this beautiful scenery. The two girls foolishly laid on the grass by the lake and counted the stars. However, they messed up their count, so they started over again. Their behavior was similar to someone's behavior in a faraway place. On the roof, Bai Changchun stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the stars in the distance. Nongzhu sat comfortably on the side and said, Old Bai, you're finally back. I thought you were really going to stay in front of the 9th Netherworld cave. Of all the things you like, why do you like to fight? Bai Changchun slowly replied, I've already told the Ghost King outside the 9th Netherworld cave that if there are more people from the underworld coming out from the 9th Netherworld cave, just lead them here. I'll be there anytime. You're crazy. Nongzhu suddenly stood up. She couldn't be comfortable anymore. She looked around with some lingering fear and said, You're crazy, you're not afraid. But we can't be compared to you. What if the masters from the underworld suddenly come? Won't we be in trouble? Don't worry. As long as someone from the underworld comes out, I'll know in advance. You can also leave in advance. Bai Changchun looked away from the distant starry sky and fell on Furong, who was counting the stars by the lake. He said quietly, When you leave, remember to take Furong with you to your purple bamboo forest. Hearing the first part of his words, Nongzhu was just relieved. But when she heard the second part, her heart tightened again. She asked suspiciously, Old Bai, tell me honestly, if there are some top masters from the underworld, are you sure you can defeat them? Bai Changchun nodded calmly and said, Yes, I'm not sure. After all, we haven't seen how strong the real masters from the underworld are. But I'm still eager for a fight. The stronger the opponent, the better. It's best if he can force me into a desperate situation. I've been exploring another way of cultivation by myself without any reference. I want to improve my strength, but I don't know where to start. Only when I meet someone stronger than me, the stronger the better. Only when I experience a fight like that with all my strength, I believe I can find a way to improve my strength by leaps and bounds and break through the realm that I've been wanting to touch. Nongzhu was dumbfounded. She swallowed hard and said, Your cultivation has reached this level, and there's still a chance to improve by leaps and bounds? Then, what kind of realm is that? The Tao. The Tao. Bai Changchun murmured, The Tao, can be Tao, is not the Tao. Nongzhu was confused and said with confusion, What Tao can be Tao and is not the Tao? Old Bai, what are you talking about? If Yu Qianqiu had heard this, he would have doubted whether Bai Changchun was also a time traveler. The Tao can be Tao but is not the Tao? Isn't it from the Tao Te Ching? Although he couldn't recite the whole Tao Te Ching, he could casually say the first few sentences. Bai Changchun shook his head slowly and said, I don't know myself. I only feel that I've touched something but I can't understand it clearly. So I need to fight with all my strength. Maybe the enlightenment is only at the moment of the battle. My self-enlightenment cultivation method is different from yours. Once I have an epiphany, my cultivation will reach another realm in a flash. Compared with the previous realm, it's not too much to describe it as like the clouds and mud. Ah. Nongzhu's mouth was wide open. He even doubted whether he had heard it wrong. Bai Changchun's current cultivation was already terrifying enough. Once he broke through to a new realm, the original horrifying cultivation would be like the mud, while the new realm would be as noble as the clouds. One was in the sky while the other was on the ground. Was there such a huge difference in cultivation? Old Bai, are you kidding? Although Nongzhu knew that Bai Changchun wouldn't lie, he still couldn't help asking. Bai Changchun didn't pay any more attention to him. He stared at the night sky and murmured to himself, Maybe the new realm can make me reborn and rebuild my body. Nongzhu was completely dumbfounded. He looked at Bai Changchun as if he was a monster. Yu Qianqiu suddenly appeared in a hidden call not far from the spirit-fragrant valley. He floated to the top of a large tree at the top of the mountain and looked around. His gaze locked onto a valley with flickering lights. Those lights were not real lights, but the fluorescent stones that were commonly used by cultivators. Obviously, that valley was Lingfang Valley. It was impossible for ordinary people to use fluorescent stones, which were only used by cultivators, in such a deep mountain. The basis of this judgment was a silver ball that was set up by the scouts in Lingfang Valley. He came here to see how the temptress and Yen Yu were doing in Lingfang Valley. The most important reason was that he himself didn't know why, but he wanted to tell the 100 Charms enchantress that he had already avenged his master Hao Sansi. However, he didn't know that the temptress already knew about this. In fact, the two of them had the silver ball that he gave them when they parted at Cornucopia. The two of them didn't know the use of this silver ball. In fact, it was given by Yu Qianqiu to make it easier for him to find them. He didn't want to tell them that it was for this reason, so the two of them mistook it as a commemorative item. He had found their location in Utopia, so he could easily appear beside them. However, there were two soul formation experts here, and he was afraid that it would cause some misunderstanding if he appeared too abruptly. After all, it wasn't a good thing to barge into someone's sleeping place in the middle of the night, especially when there was the world's most beautiful woman around. To be honest, ever since Lu Yanqing ruined his plans at Cornucopia, he didn't like this self-proclaimed world's most beautiful woman. Using her beauty as capital to ruin other people's plans, what a problem. If you have the ability, show me your true abilities, then I'll be convinced. Chapter 692. His idea was to fly slowly from a distance. With the cultivation of the two spirit-severing experts, it would not be difficult for them to find him. When they met, he would explain his purpose of coming, and naturally, there would not be any misunderstanding. Just as he was about to fly towards Lingfang Valley, he suddenly saw a shadow flashing in the light. Yu Qianqiu subconsciously hid in the branches and leaves under his feet. Usually, it was easy to see things clearly in the light from the dark, but it was difficult to see things clearly in the dark from the light. As soon as Yu Qianqiu hid himself, he regretted it. He had been too careful. He had intended to come here openly. If he had been discovered by others while hiding, it would have been strange if others did not think that he had bad intentions. Yu Qianqiu wanted to show himself, but he found that the shadow was flying towards him. So, he decided to hide quietly and held his breath, waiting for the person to leave. He believed that as long as he did not move, it would be difficult for others to find him. The person who flew over did not leave, but landed on the tree where Yu Qianqiu was hiding. It was probably because the tree was too conspicuous. Yu Qianqiu looked up and saw the person above. He suddenly felt relieved. It was none other than his old friend, Third Xn. This old man was in a good mood. He came out to see the scenery so late at night. He really did not have a normal brain. Yu Qianqiu looked at Third Xn, who was looking around. He was secretly happy and was about to scare him, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Look at this old man, why does he feel a little sneaky? What is this old man trying to do? Is he going to have an affair in the middle of the night? Yu Qianqiu's face revealed a lewd smile. He was just thinking about it. Based on his understanding of Third Xin's forthright character, he would not have an affair. He would only meet his lover openly. Third brother Xin, who was on the treetop, had already flown to the call where he jumped out from. He pushed aside a pile of wormwood and carried out two women. He held one in each of his arms and once again looked around furtively. Then he quickly sneaked into the depths of the mountain. Yu Qianqiu hid in the bushes with a dumbfounded expression. He blinked his eyes in disbelief, thinking that his eyes were playing tricks on him. But with the bright moon in the sky, he was sure that third brother Xin had carried out two women, and they were two young girls. One of them was even wearing a typical white dress. There was no mistaking it. Sure enough, it's hard to know a person's heart. You may know a person's face, but you don't know his heart. What did it mean to appear loyal but have a treacherous heart? That was exactly what this old fellow was talking about. He actually dared to challenge two people in the wilderness. Motherf **Ker, he has character. I have to go and admire him and catch him in the act. Yu Qianqiu rubbed his hands excitedly. He winked and grinned evilly as he dashed out in the direction that third brother Xin had gone. He was afraid of startling third brother Xin, so he was very careful along the way. Along the way he changed into a pure black night suit. But he found out that third brother Xin was even more careful than him. Third brother Xin would often stop and hide in the dark, watching for any movement. Fortunately, Yu Qianqiu, was not just a normal kind of sinister in this aspect. When he sensed that something was wrong, he stopped and hid like an experienced spy. The two of them acted like spies. Under the moonlight, the terrain was hazy and twisted, undulating. It was difficult for people who were not familiar with the terrain to move freely. Even though he was experienced in sneaking around, he still almost lost third brother Xian a few times. If it wasn't for the fact that third brother Xian's speed was not very fast, it would have been difficult to keep up with him. After all, there was still a gap between their cultivation levels. Most importantly, the woman third brother Xian was carrying was wearing a white dress, which was very eye-catching under the moonlight. That was why he did not lose third brother Xian. Both of them sneaked into the vast mountains. The more Yu Qianqiu followed, the more he felt that something was wrong. His expression became serious. Even if third brother Xian was having an affair, there was no need for him to go so far. He was too careful. Was there a need to go so far into such a remote place? Now it didn't seem like an affair but more like destroying the corpses. With this suspicion, he immediately remembered that the two girls seemed to be unconscious. He did not know if they were dead or alive. Yu Qianqiu squinted his eyes and followed even more carefully. He smelled a trace of conspiracy. Another half an hour later, Yu Qianqiu, who was following closely behind, saw third brother Xian bring the two girls into a valley without hesitation. His heart immediately moved, and his intuition told him that they had arrived at their destination. He carefully sneaked into the dense forest and hid behind a tree where he could roughly see the situation in the valley. Under the moonlight, he could see 70 to 80% of the situation in the valley. It was a triangular valley sandwiched by 3 mountains. There was a stream flowing in the valley. Looking at the pebbles in the valley, it was obvious that it was the dry season of the stream. When the water was full, it could cover the entire bottom of the valley. Because of this, the valley looked very clean, not even weeds could be seen. The pebbles at the bottom of the valley were flat and gray under the moonlight. The two girls that third brother Xian brought with him were lying on the ground. Where did third brother Xian go? Yu Qianqiu looked around suspiciously. He did not see third brother Xian return. Could it be that he was hiding somewhere? After waiting and observing for a while, he rubbed his chin and pondered. He felt that third brother Xian would not leave the two girls here for no reason. His gaze fell on 2 large rocks in the stream at the foot of the mountain. He then carefully and stealthily slipped down the slope of the mountain. He sneakily snuck behind the bushes beside the stream and a ball of water surged out of his body and wrapped around his entire body. He then looked around to make sure there was no one around and quickly leaped into the stream. His entire body silently merged into the stream. The stream was not very deep. The deepest part was less than 4 meters. Yu Qianqiu quietly scuttled from the bottom of the water to the shadow between the 2 big rocks. Only then did he pop his head out to observe from the gap between the rocks. At this time, his hiding position was only about 30 meters away from the center of the valley. With his cultivation, he could easily see what was happening at the bottom of the valley. He wanted to see what third brother Xian was up to by bringing 2 women here in the middle of the night. Not long after, he found that 3 people came one after another. Each of them had 2 girls in their hands and placed them on the ground. Yu Qianqiu did not know these 3 people, but he found that he could not see through their cultivation. It was obvious that they were all higher than him. But from the clothes that they were wearing, he could tell that they were also people of Spirit Fang Valley. The 3 people left the girls in their hands and flew in the same direction. Could it be that it was not third brother Xian who was up to something, but the whole Spirit Fang Valley? Yu Qianqiu wanted to go in the direction where those people disappeared. But after thinking about it, he stopped. Since they left the girls here, they would obviously come back here. For safety's sake, it was better to wait here for a while. As he expected, after a while, he saw that the 3 people came back from the direction where they disappeared. But each of them was carrying a big basin that was dug out of a whole stone. Yu Qianqiu hid in the gap of the shadow of the stone and watched curiously. He did not know what these people were up to. He saw that the 3 people had just placed the 6 basins on the ground when third brother Xian also came over with a basin. And behind him there was also a person. Yan Zhuixing? Yu Qianqiu's eyes widened. He could not believe it. After repeatedly identifying it, he confirmed that it was Yan Zhuixing, that bastard. He could not believe that third brother Xian was with Yan Zhuixing. No, it should be said, how could Spirit Fang Valley be with Yan Zhuixing? Conspiracy, there must be a conspiracy. Yu Qianqiu's face was gloomy. That Lu Yanqing did not show her true face all day long. He should have known that she was not a good person. He was so annoyed that he wanted to vomit blood. He sent the Enchantress of 100 Charms and Yan Yu to Spirit Fang Valley. Isn't this sending them to a wolf's den? Yan Zhuixing slowly walked to the side of the 8 women on the ground. After looking at them, he nodded slightly and said, "You 4 brothers did a good job. When you came, you were not discovered by anyone, right?" "No." The 4 of them bowed together and replied. So these four guys were brothers. Sure enough, they were related to Lu Yanqing. Otherwise, how could Yan Juexing instruct her four disciples? The most poisonous woman's heart. As Yu Qianqiu was gnashing his teeth in hatred, he suddenly saw Yan Juexing give the four people a look. Yu Qianqiu was on alert. The water under his neck spread up and wrapped his head. He sank into the water and stuck close to the bottom of the stone. The three Xian brothers quickly flew to the mountains on three sides. They used their eyes and divine sense to scan the area. After confirming that there was nothing suspicious, they returned to report that everything was fine. And Yu Qianqiu quietly emerged from the bottom of the water. Not a drop of water could be seen on his head. His body was in the water, but not a drop of water could be seen. This could be considered as a magical thing about cultivating water arts. Yan Juexing instructed the four of them to position the 7 basins on the ground, while he shot a beam of black light at 7 of the 8 girls. The 7 girls woke up one after another, but when they saw the surrounding scene, they could not help but scream in fear. As a result, Yan Juexing's eyes suddenly flashed with red light. In an instant, the 7 girls' minds were captured. The 7 girls immediately stood up in a daze. They looked at Yan Juexing and began to take off their clothes with a silly smile. After a while, 7 exquisite white and tender bodies appeared under the bright moonlight. F** King Red-Eye Disease bastard. Yu Qianqiu cursed with a twisted expression. He had experienced Yan Juexing's pair of red demon eyes, so he naturally knew its power. But what made him unbearable was that these girls were actually mortals. They were not people of the cultivation world at all. This bastard actually used demonic techniques on mortals and used such despicable means to desecrate mortals. At the same time, what puzzled Yu Qianqiu was that he found that Yan Juexing's cultivation was similar to his in the cornucopia, but now he could not see through it. Obviously, Yan Juexing's cultivation had broken through again. Such a godly cultivation speed, coupled with his vicious thoughts and methods, and most importantly, this person was opposing him, so he absolutely could not be allowed to live. Go. Yu Qianqiu's eyes narrowed as he sized up the situation. He had already made preparations to launch a sneak attack. Chapter 693. Yan Juexing looked up at the night sky and didn't know what he was looking at. Then he walked to the middle of the 7 stone basins. The 3 brothers of Xan Laosan swept in 4 directions and stood still. At the same time, they looked around vigilantly as if they were guarding. The 7 naked girls walked towards the 7 arranged basins without feeling anything. One of them stepped into a stone basin, sat down, and lay on their side in the basin. Half of the basin was empty, and the other half was full of people. It felt a bit like the Taiji painting. The 7 basins were like plates with good dishes, and the girls inside were the dishes on the plates. Yu Qianqiu looked confused. He didn't know what Yan Juexing wanted to do. Under the starry sky, this scene looked like some kind of sacrifice. Did this jealous person want to sacrifice living people? After the 7 girls lay in the stone basin, Yan Juexing walked to a basin and took out a pot of 7-star blood orchid from the storage bag. He inserted one hand directly into the flower pot and dug out the blood orchid together with the soil. He carefully placed the empty flower pot outside the pot. Then he took out 6 pots of blood orchid and put them into the remaining 6 stone basins in the same way. When Yu Qianqiu saw the 7 pots of blood orchid, he was so angry that his teeth itched. Obviously, they were the 7 blood orchids that were bought from him. Although these 7 pots of blood orchid had grown very luxuriant, he was sure that they were his. The only thing that made him feel strange was that the flowers of the 7-star blood orchid were all white. Why were these 7 black flowers? He secretly pondered in his heart. It must be this jealous person who used some evil magic. Yan Juexing then sat cross-legged in the middle of the arranged stone basin. He looked straight ahead with cold eyes, and his body began to emit bursts of black mist. The black mist gradually spread and became thicker and thicker. It slowly enveloped the area within a radius of 10 meters. Yan Juexing's movement couldn't be seen at all. It was much thicker than the black mist released from his body before. Obviously, his demonic skills had made a lot of progress. A rolling black mist suddenly appeared in the valley under the starry sky. This scene looked a little strange, and an abnormal aura spread in all directions. Yu Qianqiu, who was hiding in the water, couldn't help it. Now was a good opportunity. It was a good time to take advantage of the black mist to launch a sneak attack. But in the end he still endured it. He wanted to see what this jealous person was doing. Maybe he could figure out what Lingfang Valley was conspiring with this guy. Suddenly, 7 spots of red light appeared in the black mist, shining and swimming in it. At the same time, the black mist tumbled rapidly and quickly retracted. Yan Zhuixing's seated figure appeared once again. In the blink of an eye, the black mist condensed into 7 balls. The 7 balls tumbled and gradually took shape, forming 7 seemingly solid black snakes. They were black flying snakes. The snake's head flashed and danced around Yan Zhuixing. Yu Qianqiu had never seen such a strange scene before. Just as he was secretly alarmed, he suddenly saw Yan Zhuixing sit still and say, "Go." The 7 black flying snakes bent their bodies and shot into the 7 stone basins with a whoosh, like arrows being shot from a crossbow. Yu Qianqiu, who was hiding in the river, could see the blood splashing out from the 7 basins. His eyes immediately widened and his muscles tightened. He knew that the 7 girls were probably done for. He regretted not making a move earlier, but it was too late now. In order to find out, he bit his lips and resisted the urge to rush out. Because he was not only dealing with Yan Zhuixing, but also Lingfang Valley, who was known for their good reputation. Know yourself and know your enemy and you will never be defeated. He could only comfort himself and suppress the boiling killing intent in his chest. Yu Qianqiu was in a lower position, so he couldn't see what was happening in the basins. 7 bloody holes had appeared on the hearts of the 7 girls in the basins. Blood gushed into the stone basins like a fountain. More and more blood gathered in the basins, and the 7 girls became paler and paler. Their eyes slowly closed and they fell asleep in their own pools of blood, never to open their eyes again. The roots of the 7-star blood orchid were soaked in the blood. It was as if they had absorbed the vitality of the girls and became more beautiful. The 7-star blood orchid had a miraculous effect. The sunflower could automatically correspond to the sun in the sky during the day, and the 7-star blood orchid could automatically correspond to the Big Dipper in the sky at night. In addition, its color was as bright as blood, and the smell it emitted was also the smell of blood, so it was called the 7-star blood orchid. Yu Qianqiu also knew the origin of the 7-star blood orchid's name. However, at this moment, the 7-star blood orchids in the stone basins were showing a miraculous scene. Bathed in the starry sky, the 7 small black flowers were moving slowly, corresponding to the Big Dipper in the night sky. On the hearts of the 7 girls who had died, the black flying snake drilled out of the bloody hole. It wandered in the pool of blood and slowly climbed to the edge of the stone basins. It just happened to circle around with its head and tail facing each other. It raised its head and hissed as if it was waiting for something. Yan Zhuixing, who was sitting quietly, suddenly raised his arms and made a messy and complicated gesture. He shot 7 black lights into the 7 blood orchids, and then he chanted, "The light of the demon god, shine on the 7 stars. Remove the light, and take its magic. The flower of the blood demon, bloom brightly, and the magic of the stars quickly absorb it." As soon as he finished speaking, the 7 small black flowers on the 7-star blood orchid suddenly trembled violently, and the thick smell of blood gradually spread around. After a long time, a majestic and unknown aura suddenly descended from the sky, and the entire valley gave people a very oppressive feeling in an instant. Yu Qianqiu, who was hiding in the water, suddenly had a violent and uneasy mood. The light in the valley seemed to be a lot darker in an instant. Looking at the top of the 7 stone basins, there was a gray mist hovering 1 foot above them. It was getting thicker and darker. The 7 black snakes on the stone basins propped up their bodies and stuck their heads into the gray mist to greedily suck. Everything seemed so strange. Yu Qianqiu was still observing slowly at first. After waiting for an hour, Yan Zhuixing, who was sitting cross-legged, didn't move. He just quietly watched the 7 black snakes suck the gray mist with a smile. Oh! Yu Qianqiu's pupils suddenly shrank. He found that the 7 black snakes seemed to be slightly bigger than before. He immediately recalled the scene of Yan Zhuixing's body emitting black mist and condensing into a snake. The doubts in his mind were immediately dispelled, and his thoughts immediately became clear. The snake was originally condensed from the black mist released from Yan Zhuixing's body. Now the snake was absorbing the gray mist summoned by the evil method to strengthen itself. In other words, Yan Zhuixing would also become stronger after absorbing the snake back into his body. This might be the secret of Yan Zhuixing's rapid cultivation increase. After understanding it, Yu Qianqiu immediately regretted it. He had sacrificed the lives of the 7 girls in vain. How could he sit back and watch Yan Zhuixing grow stronger? Blah! Countless black flying swords suddenly rose from the stream and shot out like a torrential downpour. This sudden movement startled the few people present. Yan Zhuixing even looked back in shock. He was a little dumbfounded to see so many flying swords suddenly emerging. At such a close distance, it was too late to escape. He quickly clapped his palms, and the 7 black snakes that sucked the gray mist quickly flew up and circled in front of him. They were like shields that bounced off the flying swords that were attacking Yan Juexing. Bang bang bang. There was a dense explosion sound on the beach. Although the flying snakes helped Yan Juexing to dodge the attack, the 7-star blood orchids in the 7 stone basins suffered a disaster. Not to mention the blood orchids, even the stone basins were shattered into pieces. My blood demon flower. Yan Juexing hugged his head and let out a shrill scream. He had never been so sad in his life. These 7 basins of blood orchids were the hope of his struggle. They were destroyed just like that. It was equivalent to destroying his hope. It was more painful than taking his life. It was simply heartbreaking. You dog, I can't even kill you like this. There was a curse in the stream. 2 bright small knives appeared in the hands of Xan Laosan and his brothers in an instant. It was similar to a guillotine used to cut herbs. 8 streams of light whizzed toward the place where Yu Qianqiu was hiding without hesitation. A figure immediately popped out from behind the stone in the stream, and at the same time, a group of dense black shadows exploded. Xiu xiu, sounds were like rain, and the 8 streams of light that shot over were directly smashed into pieces. The 4 brothers didn't hesitate to rush over and attack the figure that popped up in the air. With their cultivation at the end of the tribulation stage, they arrived in an instant. The figure opened his arms and shouted, "Absorbing Star's Great Technique." The others didn't know what the Absorbing Star's Great Technique was, but Xan Laosan could be said to be engraved in his heart. He didn't have time to say anything and could only hurriedly shout, "Run!" He had already teleported back quickly. Maybe he was still worried, so he jumped into the stream to escape. However, the other 3 brothers were not so lucky. They had already entered the range of Yu Qianqiu's power. Before they could react, 3 clouds of white mist exploded in the air and rushed into Yu Qianqiu's sleeve. The 3 withered corpses fell to the ground with a thud. Yu Qianqiu landed firmly on the ground. The black flying swords that he had released earlier flew back from all directions, forming a dense defensive formation around him. Yu Qianqiu stared at Yan Juexing, who was holding his head for a long time, and snorted coldly, "Brother Yan, nice to meet you. It hasn't been long since we parted. I didn't expect to meet you here again." Xan Laosan's head popped out of the water. He stared at the 3 withered corpses on the ground and cried in pain, "5th brother, 6th brother, 7th brother." Although he was controlled by Yan Juexing and was loyal to him, he still had a normal mind. As long as it wasn't Yan Juexing's order, he could still distinguish between love and hate. He knew the pain of losing his brother. However, although he was sad, he was subconsciously afraid of Yu Qianqiu and didn't dare to come over. Yan Juexing slowly released his hand and raised his head. His eyes that were staring at Yu Qianqiu instantly turned red. He roared angrily, "Yu Qianqiu, it's you." Yu Qianqiu stared at the 7 black flying snakes that were quickly circling and flying to protect Yan Juexing. He squinted his eyes and said, "The demonic technique that you cultivate is really something. You can actually block my flying swords. Let's try again." Hundreds of black lights shot out like a torrential rain. Chapter 694. The 7 flying snakes moved like the wind and turned into 7 phantoms. Their speed was unbelievably fast and they were extremely agile. They protected Yan Juexing so that not even a drop of water could get through. Dang dang dang, after a series of explosions, Yan Juexing didn't move at all and continued to stare at Yu Qianqiu with hatred. "Damn you!" Yu Qianqiu cursed in disbelief. His attack didn't have any effect and the flying sword immediately rolled back to his side to protect him. The 7 flying snakes slowed down as well. They shook their heads and wagged their tails as they wriggled in the air. They looked at Yu Qianqiu with ferocious expressions and their eyes shone with a frightening red light. To be honest, Yu Qianqiu had always been very confident in his black fire flying sword. It was invincible and it had long become his trump card. Until now, most of the experts who had died in his hands had died under the black fire flying sword. He didn't expect to meet his nemesis today, 7 treasures. Yu Qianqiu's eyes revealed a look of envy and he wanted to take them for himself. The flying sword was dead but the 7 flying snakes were alive. Regardless of speed or agility, the flying sword couldn't compare to them. What was rare was that they were very sturdy. Even the sharpness of the black fire flying sword couldn't hurt them at all. Looking at the scene of them growing stronger by devouring them, it seemed like they could even level up and evolve. Damn. However, Yu Qianqiu also knew that he could only envy Yan Juexing. These 7 flying snakes weren't real animals that could be tamed. They were formed by Yan Zhuixing's demonic technique. Yu Qianqiu, you deserve to die 1,000 times. Yan Zhuixing gritted his teeth and spat out word by word. The sound of his bones cracking could be heard. Deserving of 10,000 deaths? Yu Qianqiu's eyes fell on the pools of blood on the ground. Even the girl who was still in a coma was smashed into pieces by his flying sword. His heart slightly tightened and his expression turned cold. He stared at Yan Zhuixing and said in a deep voice, "Last time we didn't decide the winner, but you ran away with your tail between your legs. This time don't run away if you have the guts. Let's see who will die first." "Do you really think that I'm afraid of you and will run away?" Yan Zhuixing sneered with a face full of resentment. "I'm only interested in the hero behind you and want to subdue him for my own use. That's why I didn't kill you. I didn't expect you to be so arrogant that even my demonic eyes couldn't control you. Now you've even destroyed 7 of my blood demon flowers. Now that you know my secret, how can I let you leave alive?" Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank. He didn't expect Yan Zhuixing to know that he was related to Hero, but thinking about it, it made sense. Back in the 100 Flowers Valley, he had used Hero to frame the father and son. Others might not know, but the person involved must know. It wasn't strange for him to guess that Hero was related to him. Don't brag too early. It's still uncertain who won't leave alive. However, I definitely won't die. Do you believe me? Yu Qianqiu smiled sinisterly. He had Utopia as his final trump card. Even if he couldn't defeat Yan Zhuixing, he was confident that he could escape. Therefore he believed that he wouldn't die. Yan Zhuixing sneered in disdain. "Do you really think that you're the #1 expert below the soul formation stage? You'll naturally believe me after I beat you up." Yu Qianqiu smiled sinisterly. Suddenly he changed the topic and sighed. "On account of us being old friends, I'll tell you a piece of unfortunate news. Your father Yan Bugue really can't come back anymore. Because of your sins he was killed on the Everlasting Island. What a terrible death. Not only was he dismembered into pieces, he was even thrown into the sea to feed the fishes. Brother Yan, you have to hold on." "Nonsense." Yan Zhuixing roared fiercely. A faint murderous aura began to float out from his body. However, looking at his dazed expression, he seemed to have more or less believed it. Thinking about it, he was being hunted by various countries. How could his father, who was with them, have a good ending? Now's the time. Yu Qianqiu raised his brows. Hundreds of flying swords shot out while Yan Zhuixing was dazed. However, the 7 flying snakes that were protecting Yan Zhuixing seemed to have a mind of their own. Without Yan Zhuixing's control, they would automatically protect their master. It danced rapidly and bounced off the incoming flying swords with clanging sounds. Yan Zhuixing came back to his senses and said indifferently, "Is that all you've got? Burn your mother." Yu Qianqiu cursed. The flying swords that he shot out exploded. The surging black flames instantly engulfed Yan Zhuixing and the 7 flying snakes. However, there was no response from the inside. Yu Qianqiu's expression changed. Thinking back to the scene at the saber drawing assembly, he cursed in his heart. This guy really isn't afraid of the black flames. Sure enough, Yan Zhuixing's disdainful snort came from the black flames. So that's how it is. It's the same as the broadsword, condensed from fire. It can be considered a mystical technique. It might work against others, but it's useless against me. In the surging black flames, a figure slowly walked out. There were 7 pairs of red lights circling around him. Yan Zhuixing calmly walked out of the flames. Coupled with the indifferent expression on his face, he looked like a demon that walked out of hell. Yan Zhuixing stood at the edge of the black flames. He stared at Yu Qianqiu and snorted. He slowly opened his arms and took a deep breath. The surging flames quickly rolled over and entered his nostrils and mouth like a whale sucking in water. The most terrifying thing was that his face was filled with a comfortable expression. The 7 flying snakes around him were also greedily sucking the black flames. The netherworld ghost flame actually became their tonic? Yu Qianqiu was dumbfounded. He couldn't let them take advantage of him. He stretched out his palm and the surging sea of flames was quickly retracted into his sleeve. He could clearly feel that it had lessened a lot. Insignificant skill. Yan Zhuixing snorted in disdain and said indifferently, "Kill him." The 7 flying snakes shot out without hesitation. Yu Qianqiu naturally wouldn't just sit and wait for death. The flying swords around him immediately danced like a group of demons as they desperately blocked the 7 flying snakes. A series of clanging sounds rang out. The flying snakes weren't afraid of the flying swords that were burning with black flames at all. They shook their heads and wagged their tails as they charged forward with malevolent expressions. Their auras were ferocious and exceptionally valiant. The black flames' flying swords couldn't stop them. It was like scratching an itch on their bodies. It could only slow down their speed. Fuck. This is really troublesome. Yuchencho suddenly had a feeling that he had nowhere to use his strength. These strange flying snakes couldn't be destroyed no matter how he slashed at them. They had a body full of skills, but he couldn't do anything to them. If he couldn't even deal with Yan Zhuixing's snakes, what was the point of fighting him? If he was forced to run away by a few snakes, then he would lose a lot of face. Just as he was thinking of a way to deal with them, the 7 flying snakes that were entangled by the flying swords suddenly sped up. They were like arrows that were released from a bow as they quickly launched a surprise attack. Yuchencho was shocked and quickly dodged. Suddenly he felt a tight grip on his wrist. There was a slippery feeling as if he was being strangled by a strong force. He couldn't dodge nimbly anymore. He quickly glanced around and was instantly shocked. He saw a flying snake had already wrapped around one of his arms. It opened its bloody mouth and was about to bite his hand. Right at this moment, his limbs tightened and a huge pressure came from his waist and neck at the same time, almost suffocating him. Yuchencho, today is the day you die. Yan Zhuixing's cold laughter echoed in the valley. Just at this moment, the valley suddenly shone with a dazzling green light. The entire valley was dyed in a bright green color. Hiss, hiss. A few shrill hisses echoed in the valley. At the critical moment, Yuchencho, who was about to be bitten by the snakes, suddenly burst out with a ferocious green flame. The 7 flying snakes wrapped around Yuchencho's body immediately emitted intense white smoke. They were shrinking at a visible speed. The flying snakes shook their heads and hissed in pain. They stopped entangling Yuchencho and quickly retreated. In the blink of an eye, they were out of the sea of green flames. They hid beside Yan Zhuixing. Their bodies were much weaker. They trembled and looked at the ball of green flames in fear. Someone in the azure flame let out a strange ha sound. Yuchencho, who was hiding in the azure flame, looked at himself in surprise. It seemed that even he didn't dare to believe what he was seeing. He had released the green flames out of instinct to protect himself. He had already made preparations to return to Utopia, but he didn't expect the green flames to have such a miraculous effect. Yuchencho originally thought that even the powerful black fire couldn't deal with the snakes and that he was already at his wit's end. Who knew that the green flames, which were much weaker than black fire, could restrain them? Indeed, everything has a nemesis. How strange. Yuchencho, who was in the green flames, immediately burst out with a strange cackle. He looked no different from a devil or monster, and his laughter was abnormally insolent. The surrounding black flying swords all disappeared into the green flame with a whooshing sound. Then a large number of green flying swords appeared and danced around the floating green flame. It was a breathtaking sight. Yan Zhuixing looked at the 7 flying snakes in astonishment and revealed a pained expression. Yuchencho's fire made his heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. The flying snakes were connected to his cultivation. If the flying snakes were damaged, it was equivalent to his cultivation being damaged. How could he not feel pained? Yan Zhuixing, hand over your life. Yuchencho shouted wildly. Now that he had the upper hand, he didn't plan to let Yan Zhuixing off even though he was just about to escape. He waved his arms and a sky full of green swords rained down. It was as if they wanted to turn the ground into a sieve. The 7 injured flying snakes rushed out to block and protect their master. However, their nemesis was their nemesis. The green flames flying swords weren't as sharp as the black fire flying swords, but they were extremely sharp against them. There was almost no sound. With a whooshing sound, the 7 flying snakes were immediately cut into pieces, like eels being chopped up on a chopping board to be cooked. Yan Zhuixing was alarmed. He clapped his hands and his body suddenly split into 3 like smoke, dodging the gaps of the green sword rain gently. 3 shadows that were as light as smoke swiftly devoured the snake fragments that were scattered in the air. Immediately after, they spun thousands of times in the rain of green swords, broke free from the net of swords and charged straight at Yuchencho. Chapter 695. Yuchencho could not help but gasp. With such a dense rain of swords, even an expert at the end of the tribulation stage would lack the space to teleport. This fellow's body that had split into 3 was actually as soft as a flowing cloud. It could be long or short, flat or wide, and it could even twist like a fried dough twist, slipping through the narrow gaps of the net of swords. He had always thought that this was an illusion technique, but looking at the situation, it seemed that the 3 shadows were the real body. As expected of a demonic technique, it was really strange. Without much time to think, the green flames surged to protect his body. The flying swords that were shot out quickly turned around and shot back with Yu Qianqiu as the center. Yan Zhuixing originally wanted to forcefully break through the sea of green flames and take Yu Qianqiu's life. But when he got close, he immediately realized that the temperature of the flames was frighteningly high. Actually, the high temperature was secondary. He could use the domineering demonic technique to force his way through. But the scary thing was that when he got close to the green flames, the demonic aura in his body actually showed signs of not flowing smoothly. The speed of his movements and attacks slowed down a lot. Thinking of the scene where the 7 spiritual snakes were easily cut apart, Yan Zhuixing was shocked. The demonic technique that he was so proud of was actually restrained by the green flames. The closer he got, the slower the demonic aura in his body circulated. His speed slowed down, but the flying swords behind him sped up and shot back. The flying swords were shot out in a spread pattern, and they flashed back through the gaps. Now that they were shot back, it was conceivable that the gap in the middle was much narrower than when they were shot out. In addition, the speed had slowed down. Yan Zhuixing was almost scared out of his wits. Even if the spiritual snakes were cut apart, as long as the body was still there, he could reform it. But if his body of flesh and blood was cut into pieces, he would lose his life. In front of him was Yu Qianqiu's sinister smile. Even if he was furious and wanted to tear him into pieces, it was not as important as saving his own life. The faces of the 3 phantoms were almost indistinguishable. They quickly broke away from the sea of fire that was pressing towards them. Like drifting clouds and smoke, they made hundreds and thousands of turns and narrowly passed through the green sword net. Yu Qianqiu was amazed. This demonic technique was really too magical. It would be great if he had the chance to practice it. However, as soon as he recalled the tragic deaths of those girls, he immediately dispelled that thought. He didn't think that he was a good person, but as a man, no matter if he was despicable or shameless, good or bad, he had to have something in his heart that could support the heavens and the earth. There were things that he could do and things that he couldn't. Only then would he be worthy of being a man. As soon as the 3 wisps of green smoke left the sword net, they immediately combined into one on the way back. Yan Zhuixing's original body immediately appeared in the air. However, his current image was a little too horrible to look at. There was no trace of her hair crown, and nearly half of her long hair had been shaved off. Her clothes were tattered, and it was unknown how many cuts there were on her body. Fortunately, she was not injured. It could be seen how much of a risk he had taken to escape just now. He had practically brushed past the edge of death or serious injury to escape. This was all thanks to the miraculous demonic arts he had cultivated. The entire valley was dyed with green light. The stream reflected the green light, like a green jade belt. Third brother Xin, who had his head above the water, was dumbfounded as he watched the 2 fight. This was a fight that he had never seen before. Both of them were using strange techniques. It couldn't be said that the winner had been decided yet, and he didn't know who would win and who would lose in the end. Yan Zhuixing, whose clothes were tattered and hair was disheveled, gnashed his teeth as he checked his body. He shouted angrily, "Yu Qianqiu, I won't forgive you. Use your brain before you speak. Look at yourself now. You're like a stray dog. Who is the one who won't forgive who?" Yu Qianqiu, who was in the sea of fire, suddenly said, "I almost forgot. You were originally a stray dog. In order to escape, you didn't even care about your mother and sister. Now you don't even care about your old father. I think you'll have to hide for the rest of your life. You'll be a dog that can't return to its home for the rest of your life." These words made Yan Zhuixing tremble in anger. His eyes instantly turned blood red. His body faintly emitted a black light and a majestic killing intent rose. His chest swelled up and he suddenly spat a mouthful of blood on his palms. He clapped his palms and rubbed them together. In an instant, layers of red blood spread out from his palms. The faint red light enveloped a radius of nearly 10 meters. It was like a treasure light covering his entire body. Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank. He immediately became vigilant and his flying swords formed a formation to protect himself. Yan Zhuixing's strange techniques were simply unimaginable. He couldn't help but be careful. Yan Zhuixing clapped his palms again and chanted in a deep voice, "Blood Demon Armor." The red light within a radius of 10 meters quickly shrank. In the blink of an eye, it was like a red armor covered his body. In addition to that pair of red eyes, he looked like a monster. It was terrifying to look at. The first to strike is the strongest and the second to strike will suffer. This was the truth that Yu Qianqiu believed in when he was killing people. He waved his hands and hundreds of flying swords shot out crazily. Shoot the motherf asterisk cur first. Demonic light glimpse. His voice echoed in the valley. Yan Zhuixing's body suddenly disappeared from the spot. Xiao. An unbelievably fast red light directly collided with the rain of green swords shot out by Yu Qianqiu. The speed of the flying swords paled in comparison to the speed of the red light. It was like child's play. The speed was almost the same as teleportation. Ping ping. Rapid sounds of collision could be heard. A red light forcefully charged into the rain of swords, causing the green flying swords to be in a mess. In the blink of an eye, it broke through the rain of swords and arrived in front of Yu Qianqiu. The red light continued to charge into the sea of green flames. A fist was violently punched out. Little devil fist. Yu Qianqiu vaguely heard these three words. The speed was too fast. The three words little devil fist and demonic light glimpse were almost superimposed together. The scene of Yan Zhuixing smashing the big black saber in cornucopia flashed in Yu Qianqiu's mind. He seemed to have heard the three words little devil fist at that time. If the big black saber couldn't do it, then he would use the big green saber. Although it was slow, it was actually fast. At the same time when Yan Zhuixing forcefully broke through the rain of swords, Yu Qianqiu struggled to raise a huge shining green saber. This saber was frighteningly huge. It was 4 to 5 meters long and more than 1 meter wide. High. The green light broke through the air and formed a green light screen, illuminating the entire valley. Yu Qianqiu held the saber with both hands and used all his strength to crazily slash at the red light. Bang! A loud sound reverberated in the valley. Countless scattered green light fragments were more dazzling than the stars in the sky, and shot in all directions like meteors. The tinkling sound of falling to the ground could be heard everywhere on the beach. The Daqing saber was instantly shattered by a powerful force. Pfft. Yu Qianqiu looked up and spat out a mouthful of blood. His body was shaken and flew backward rapidly. He felt that his internal organs had shifted and his stomach was in turmoil. His eyes were seeing stars and his ears were ringing non-stop. He didn't even know that he had been shaken and flew backward. He only felt dizzy as if the world was spinning, as if he was in a fog. The red figure that was rushing over also stopped for a moment. The red armor instantly collapsed. Yan Zhuixing, whose hair was disheveled, let out a muffled groan. His other hand was holding onto the fist that he had just punched out furiously. Bright red blood was dripping between his fingers. He pulled out the fist from his palm in disbelief. In fact, it could no longer be considered a complete fist, because half of the fist had already been cut off to God knows where, and the broken bones inside were clearly visible. The blood demon's armor and the magic ray glimpse were demonic techniques that he had cultivated recently. He didn't expect that they would be broken by Yu Qianqiu's saber the first time he used them. With Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, it was impossible for him to break these two sets of demonic techniques. The key to the problem was undoubtedly that big green saber. He was now 100% sure that Yu Qianqiu's green fire could restrain his demonic technique. He hated the fact that his demonic technique was still far from completion. Otherwise, how could a small green fire restrain it? However, that big green saber was also shattered by his own small demonic fist. Yan Zhuixing's gaze retracted from the green fragments around him and coldly stared at Yu Qianqiu. The injury on his hand didn't seem to have much effect on him. Yu Qianqiu, who was covered in green flames, fell onto a rock on the stream with a "pa" sound. It was the rock that he had been hiding on earlier. The green fire instantly retracted back into his body. Without anyone controlling the flying swords, they all fell to the ground one after another. Yu Qianqiu struggled a few times but he couldn't stand up. So he simply stopped moving. He sat on the rock paralyzed to recover his energy. His arms were behind his back, supporting his upper body. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth, but he still laughed and said, "Brother Yin, how was the taste of this saber? Brother, did I go too hard?" Third Xin, who was hiding in the river, jumped out of the water with a hua sound. He could also see that Yu Qianqiu was injured, so he wanted to take this opportunity to kill him. Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around and sneered, "Third Xin, if you're not afraid of death, come and try. No matter how badly injured I am, taking care of you is still a piece of cake. You back off. This is between me and him." Yan Zhuixing waved his broken palm and stopped Third Xin. He stared at Yu Qianqiu and said in a deep voice, "I want to take his dog life with my own hands. Today he won't be able to escape." "What a joke. You're just a stray dog?" Yu Qianqiu sneered, "You're missing one part of your fist. Let's see how you're going to use the small demonic fist. There are many ways to kill you. Moreover, everyone has two fists." Yan Zhuixing slowly raised his other fist and shot down from above. He shouted angrily, "Small demonic fist." An intense wind from his fist swept over. Yu Qianqiu sneered, and the stream behind him suddenly surged up violently. The stream was immediately cut off, and the exposed rocks below could be seen. The water from above came crashing down again. Two huge water dragons directly hit Yan Zhuoxing, who was pouncing over. A lump of ice appeared in the air in an instant, wrapping Yan Zhuoxing inside and falling straight down. Yu Qianqiu quickly bounced off the stone and shot towards the lump of ice. But before the lump of ice landed on the ground, cracks appeared on it. With a bang, it exploded into countless pieces of ice and a figure shot out. Actually, Yu Qianqiu didn't expect the ice to trap him. This kind of ice couldn't even trap a core formation stage cultivator, let alone Yan Zhuoxing. But what he wanted was this buffer time. He slapped Yan Zhuoxing in the air and shouted angrily, "Absorbing Star's great technique." Chapter 696. When these 4 words rang in the valley, 3rd XN had the urge to run away. He looked at Yan Zhuoxing, who broke out of the ice in horror, looking forward to his master's amazing skill to show its power again. However, Yan Zhuoxing disappointed him in the end. He also saw the fierceness of the Absorbing Star's great skill again. Yu Qianqiu attacked with his palm. A cloud of white fog exploded from Yan Zhuoxing's body, and the white fog drilled into the former's palm like a flowing cloud. Yan Zhuoxing lost his momentum in an instant. His body instantly became thinner and he slowly floated down, smashing into the ground with a thud. The valley instantly became quiet as if everything was over. Finally, he got rid of this big trouble. Yu Qianqiu let out a sigh of relief. He floated in the air and stared at the pile of bones below him, laughing. He clicked his tongue proudly and said, "My Absorbing Star's great skill is nothing special when I don't use it. Once I use it, it will never fail." Dongfang Bubi was considered powerful in the past. Once he used the Absorbing Star's great skill, he still lost. Amazing. 3rd Xian was completely dumbfounded. Even when he was awake, he did not know who Dongfang Bubi was. There was only one sentence that kept reverberating in his mind. "Master is dead." Yu Qianqiu, who was laughing and boasting himself, suddenly exclaimed in surprise. "You seem to have found something wrong." Logically speaking, a person who was hit by his Absorbing Star's great skill and had all the water in his body sucked dry should be smashed to pieces when he fell from a height of more than 10 meters. However, Yan Zhuoxing's dried corpse, although it was already like a skeleton, was still standing there. It looked a little strange. At this moment, a ball of black light suddenly appeared from Yan Zhuoxing's body. It spread out and quickly protected his corpse. As the ball of black light emerged, Yu Qianqiu suddenly sensed a terrifying aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. It was desolate, ancient, and the entire valley seemed to have instantly traversed through space and returned to the distant past. The unknown aura was so terrifying that it made people suffocate. It was so thick and powerful that it was indescribable. He was clearly looking down from the sky, but it was as if he was looking up at a towering, majestic mountain. It made his heart surge with emotions, but also filled him with endless trembling. The instant the black light enveloped Yan Zhuoxing's corpse, the surrounding ice cubes all clanked and bounced on the ground. Yu Qianqiu and 3rd brother XN looked around in fear. Suddenly, with a so-so sound, with Yan Zhuoxing as the center, the surrounding crushed ice quickly gathered and wrapped around Yan Zhuoxing in an instant. Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank. He saw an unbelievable scene. The corpse wrapped in ice was rapidly expanding, as if it was absorbing the water from the ice to replenish its body. Damn it. This was too monstrous. Could it be that this dog couldn't be killed? In a panic, Yu Qianqiu clenched his teeth, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed across his face. He spread his arms, and all the green fragments and flying swords in the valley returned to his body. He clasped his hands together, and the green light once again illuminated the valley. A huge green saber that was 4 to 5 meters long appeared in his hand. "Yan Zhuoxing, I don't care if you're a human, a demon, or a demon. I don't believe in evil. I'll chop you into minced meat. Let's see how you're going to survive." Yu Qianqiu shouted. With a whoo sound, a green light flashed across the sky, and a crazy saber shadow slashed towards the figure in the ice cubes. Bang! The ice cubes suddenly exploded, and a figure emerged from the ice cubes. Immediately he let out a shrill scream. Yan Zhuoxing did resurrect, but unfortunately he ran into Yu Qianqiu, who believed in eliminating the root of the problem. The moment he broke out of the ice cubes, he ran into the saber. He didn't even have time to dodge. His body quickly dodged, but he was still hit by the saber. Blood splattered, and the saber directly cut down from his shoulder. His entire arm was separated from his body, and his arm was sent flying on the spot. When Yu Qianqiu became ruthless, he was definitely a ruthless character. There was no such thing as mercy. What he wanted was Yan Zhuixing's life. How could an arm satisfy his desire? He shouted with a ferocious face, "Give me your life." The saber followed Yan Zhuixing's dodging body and chased after him. Yan Zhuixing, who had already lost a lot of vitality, desperately waved a little devil fist with his other hand and smashed it on the broad saber. With a loud dang sound, the saber was immediately shaken off. However, it seemed that he had the will but not the strength. He, who had lost a lot of vitality, had no strength to shatter the great green saber. He could only shake it off. Taking advantage of this gap, he quickly dodged and drew an arc downwards. When he was close to the ground, he grabbed the arm that was separated from his body. Yu Qianqiu's arm shook, and he realized that the power of Yan Zhuixing's little devil fist was far from what he had imagined. He immediately understood that this kid was too heavily injured and didn't have much lethality. In other words, now was the best time to kill him. He must not miss this opportunity. The terrifyingly large great green saber quickly slashed again. Yan Zhuixing, who was pale, stepped on the ground and used the momentum to retreat. The great green saber brushed past him and he barely escaped this attack. Bang! The ground was slashed by the saber and the gravel flew everywhere. Yu Qianqiu missed his attack, so he pushed the saber and quickly chased after Yan Zhuixing. He stabbed wildly at Yan Zhuixing, who was flying backward. The scene of him slashing madly made people speechless. Yan Zhuixing, who was exhausted, was immediately scared out of his wits. His pale face became even paler. Yan Zhuixing, who was dancing on the blade, immediately understood that Yu Qianqiu was now full of vigor, and he didn't have the strength to fight with Yu Qianqiu in his current physical condition. If he continued to waste time, he would only die. He immediately shouted, "Third brother Xen, go to Lingfang Valley quickly and steal your master's 10 pots of blood orchids at all costs. Hurry!" Third brother Xen immediately flew away without hesitation, and the direction was Lingfang Valley. 10 pots of blood orchids? Even if I give you 10,000 pots of blood orchids, you won't have the chance to use them again. Today I must chop you into minced meat and feed you to the dogs. I'll see how you can resurrect. Still want to run? Stop right there. Just give me a few slashes and I'll give you a quick death. Now you know that I'm the #1 master below the spirit-severing stage. Motherf asterisk her. Don't run. Yu Qianqiu kept scolding, and his hands didn't slow down either, slashing wildly. He wouldn't stop until he killed you. Yan Zhuixing, whose hair was disheveled and clothes were ragged, had a pale face. At this time there was a morbid flush on his face. He stared at Yu Qianqiu and almost spewed fire. Under such a crushing defeat, he still had to suffer insults while fleeing in a hurry. No one could stand it. As long as one had a little bit of courage, it would be strange if he didn't fight desperately. At this time, Yan Zhuixing almost lost his mind after being scolded by Yu Qianqiu. He really wanted to rush forward and fight. Even if he could bite Yu Qianqiu, he would be willing to die. However, a trace of reason told him that he couldn't be impulsive. If he was impulsive at this time, he might not even have the chance to take revenge. Yan Zhuixing, who was fleeing in a hurry, stared at the broken arm in his hand. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. He originally wanted to use demonic arts to reattach the broken arm, but now it seemed that saving his life was the top priority. Escape. Yan Zhuixing, who was in the saber light, suddenly grabbed the broken arm and squeezed it. With a bang, the entire broken arm instantly exploded into pieces. In an instant, a large amount of blood mist appeared, making it impossible to see anything clearly. Not to mention Yan Zhuixing's strange behavior. When Yu Qianqiu heard that escape, he immediately felt that something was wrong. The cyan saber shadow immediately danced wildly in the blood mist. He roared angrily, "Yan Zhuixing, don't run if you have the guts. Whoever runs is a beast." The expanding blood mist suddenly collapsed and shrank rapidly, forming a blood scab that fell to the ground. The valley was restored to its original state. Yu Qianqiu, who was dancing wildly with the saber, stopped and saw that the surroundings were empty. There was no trace of Yan Zhuixing. He didn't even know where Yan Zhuixing escaped from. There was no sound of anyone leaving at all. Yan Zhuixing seemed to have suddenly disappeared. He didn't know that if Yan Zhuixing still had the strength when he was in the cornucopia, he would probably have died in the hands of Yu Qianqiu. However, during this time, Yan Juexing, who had used the 7-star blood orchid to successfully break through to the middle stage of crossing calamity, practiced a few demonic arts that he could barely dabble in, and saved his life at the critical moment. However, there was a special reason why he was magically resurrected after being hit by Yu Qianqiu's absorbing star's great technique. Perhaps even Yan Juexing himself didn't know how he came back to life again. What he used to escape just now was the blood escape from the demonic book, which was one of the demonic arts that he had just practiced. Normally, it would be very difficult to cultivate until the end of the tribulation, but because of his current difficult situation, he forced himself to cultivate and almost suffered the backlash of the demonic art. During the process he endured unimaginable pain, but he stubbornly gritted his teeth and endured it. Practicing the blood escape was originally used to guard against masters in the soul formation stage, but who knew that he would be forced to use it for the first time by Yu Qianqiu? The use of this demonic art consumed a lot of devil aura, and it also used a lot of one's own blood essence as a primer. It was an escape method that was used as a last resort, and generally wouldn't be used easily. Demonic cultivators with high cultivation could use the blood escape to save their lives, and they could escape thousands of miles in an instant. The higher their cultivation, the farther they could escape, and it was very effective in saving their lives at the critical moment. However, with Yan Juexing's current cultivation and physical state, he couldn't escape far at all. The blood escape just now only escaped for about 10 miles. At this time, Yan Juexing was hiding in a desolate ravine, and even he didn't know where he was. His face was as yellow as gold paper, and his whole body was curled up on the ground. His whole body was trembling in pain, and beads of sweat the size of soybeans appeared on his forehead. He endured the pain and told himself that he must not faint. Once he fainted, the smell of blood on his body would definitely attract the ferocious beasts in the deep mountains. There was no lack of ferocious beasts in the deep mountains. If he didn't die in the hands of Yu Qianqiu, but died in the hands of beasts, it would be too unjust. He held his shoulder that had lost an arm with one hand, and tried to sit up to recover. He gritted his teeth a few times but he couldn't sit up. His body was too weak. In the end he bit his lips so hard that blood came out and the veins on his neck bulged. Ugh. He raised his head and let out a painful groan and finally sat up. After panting a few times, he sat cross-legged with difficulty, and quickly treated the wound on his shoulder. He stopped the blood flow and slowly entered a state of recovery. Chapter 697. In the empty valley, Yu Qianqiu flew quickly and searched the dense forest on 3 sides. However, even after searching several times with his eyes and divine sense, he could not find any trace of Yan Juexing. Thinking of Yan Juexing's escape before he escaped, Yu Qianqiu flew up into the sky and looked around at the boundless mountains. It was easier said than done to find a person who was intentionally hiding in these boundless mountains. He could not help but feel a sense of powerlessness in his heart. He was afraid that the guy had really escaped. Not good. Yu Qianqiu suddenly exclaimed. He remembered that Yan Juexing told 3rd XN to steal 10 pots of 7-star blood orchid from Lu Yanqing. Didn't he give 10 pots of 7-star blood orchid to Lu Yanqing? If those 10 pots of blood orchid fell into Yan Juexing's hands, the consequences would be unimaginable. 3rd XIN's figure had long disappeared from the valley. Yu Qianqiu did not hesitate to fly quickly in the direction of Lingfang Valley. He increased his flying speed to the limit that his cultivation could control. He flew through the sky anxiously. In an instant, a figure went far away. The valley was a mess, the ground was a mess, and there were potholes everywhere. After a night of torment, the sky was already bright. There was a red light in the east, and the sunrise was imminent. The vast mountains retreated quickly below. Yu Qianqiu, who was flying at high speed, suddenly frowned and slowed down. With his speed, he definitely could not catch up with 3rd XIN. But this was not the most important thing. The key was that Lu Yanqing and Yan Juexing were basically a snake and a rat. There should be 2 spirit-severing experts in Lingfang Valley. He had killed 3 of Lu Yanqing's disciples. Wasn't it courting death to rush there now? With his current cultivation he was not a match for a spirit-severing expert. Bitch. Don't fall into my hands. Yu Qianqiu hit his fist heavily in the air. His face was full of regret. He regretted that he fell for that bitch's trick and gave her 10 pots of 7-star blood orchid. The most terrible thing was that he actually gave 100 charms and Yenyu to her. Wasn't this asking for death? Now he had no choice but to go to the Spirit Fang Valley. Not for anything else but just to save the temptress and Yenyu, he had no choice but to go there. However, charging in alone was not a solution. He had to find 2 experts to help him. No matter how he thought about it, he really didn't know who to ask for help. Baiwan Nation was close to this place, and Wen Lanfeng's cultivation was strong enough. But the key was that this guy had lost his soul to Lu Yanqing. It would be good if he didn't help, and he might even be in cahoots with her. It was bamboo making. He also had a good relationship with Lu Yanqing. He couldn't bring himself to ask his master to save his woman. If only Yin Baikong was still alive. After thinking about a lot of people, he still felt that they were not suitable. In the end, he thought about Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan, and Ouyangda. In any case, those 3 fellows were rushing to flatter Hibiscus. He was prepared to use Hibiscus's name to invite these 3 monstrous experts. Otherwise, if an ordinary person heard that they were going to deal with Lu Yanqing, they would definitely be scared away by Wen Lanfeng. Yu Qianqiu was about to go to the Blue Palace when he suddenly became startled. His eyes flashed and he muttered to himself. Yan Zhuixing asked 3rd XN to steal the 7-star blood orchid. Steal the 7-star blood orchid? Why? Aren't they in cahoots? Not good. 3rd XN and the others might have been controlled by Yan Zhuixing's devil eye. He reacted in a flash, but 3rd XN had already left for a while, and he was afraid that he would soon reach Lingfang Valley. At present, stopping 3rd XIN from stealing the blood orchid was the top priority. He suddenly became anxious and flew in the direction of Lingfang Valley. Not long after, he suddenly slapped himself in the face and scolded, "Why am I so stupid?" He suddenly disappeared in the air. When he reappeared, he was already in the call where he first came to Lingfang Valley last night. But just as he appeared, a figure flew over his head with a whoosh. Yu Qianqiu looked up and saw that it was Xan Laosan. Who else could it be? He didn't expect that Xan Laosan had arrived. He immediately jumped into the air and chased after him, shouting angrily, "3rd XN, don't run. Stop right there." 3rd XN looked back and was immediately shocked. He had already flown with all his might, but he didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to still chase after him. Without saying anything, he shot toward the peak of Lingfang Valley's medicine hut. As soon as 3rd XN landed on the platform, he immediately rushed to the stone slab on the right side where the spirit herbs were placed. The 10 pots of blood orchids on the stone slab were all put into his storage bag. At this moment, someone suddenly shouted, "Who is the one pretending to be his father here?" A figure swept into the air from Medicine Hut Mountain. He was tall and thin, and he stared angrily at Yu Qianqiu who was flying over. This person was none other than 9th Xan of the Xan family, an early divine transformation cultivator of Lingfang Valley. There was no difference between Yu Qianqiu pretending to be 3rd Xian's father and him pretending to be his father. Naturally, he was very unhappy. 3rd Xian, who was about to escape, suddenly had his eyes lit up. He cried out in pain, "9th brother, this person killed 5th brother, 6th brother, and 7th brother. He also stole Master's 10 pots of blood orchids. Quickly kill him." What? 9th Xian, who was in the air, was shocked. When he looked back at 3rd Xan, he saw that the 10 pots of blood orchids on the stone slab next to him were indeed gone. 3rd Xian was his brother, so he naturally believed what he said. As for the 7-star blood orchids being stolen by 3rd Xian, he would not even think about it. 3rd Xan, your mother's bullshit. Yu Qianqiu cursed. Suddenly, he saw 3rd Xan sprang up and directly swept toward the dense forest behind the mountain. He immediately waved his hand and shouted from afar, You, stop him, don't let him escape." 9th Xian's face suddenly darkened. Isn't 3rd Xian's mother his mother? He teleported in front of Yu Qianqiu, who was chasing 3rd Xian. He waved his palm and a strong wave of qi blocked Yu Qianqiu. If Lu Yanqing didn't hate fighting and killing, he would have already made his move. Damn it. If you don't want to chase, then get out of my way. Don't block me, Yu Qianqiu said in exasperation. Unfortunately, he changed his position several times, but he was forced to not move an inch by 9th Xian's palm. Little did he know that this was the consequence of his foul mouth. Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was not enough to catch up with 3rd Xian. Now that he was blocked, he could only watch helplessly as 3rd Xian disappeared into the distant mountains. He immediately flew into a rage and pointed at 9th Xian, shouting, "Who are you? Do you know that you are in big trouble? I am Lingfang Valley's 9th Xian." 9th Xian stared at Yu Qianqiu with murderous eyes and asked in a deep voice, "My 3rd brother said that you killed my 5th brother, 6th brother, and 7th brother. You also stole our sect's spiritual herb, the 7-star blood orchid. Is that true?" Yu Qianqiu was startled. Only then did he remember that 3rd Xian had called him 9th brother. It seemed that this person in front of him was another spirit-severing expert from Lingfang Valley. In the small courtyard, Lu Yanqing heard the commotion outside early in the morning. But because of her appearance, she never came out to see strange men. But when she heard Third Xan say that 5th brother, 6th brother and 7th brother were killed, she could no longer sit still. Her pretty face was frosty and she slowly walked out of the house. But when she saw the person in the air who was confronting 9th Xan, she immediately said, "Yu Qianqiu, why is it you?" After 9th Xan heard his master's words, he was also startled. He stared at Yu Qianqiu and looked him up and down. Then he said in astonishment, "You are Yu Qianqiu?" He was now a little suspicious of his third brother's words. With his master's eyesight, he certainly wouldn't recognize the wrong person. Since this person was Yu Qianqiu, and the master's 7-star blood orchid was originally gifted by him, why would he steal it back? Besides, third brother often talked about how good Yu Qianqiu was. Could it be a joke? In addition to third Xian's wild temperament, 9th Xian immediately confirmed his own guess. The haze on his face immediately disappeared. He cursed in his heart, third brother is too willful. How can he make such a joke? I am Yu Qianqiu. After Yu Qianqiu replied, his gaze fell on the woman on the mountain plain. She was wearing a green robe and looked familiar. That simple yet dazzling appearance made everything around her pale in comparison. He was afraid that in this world, there wouldn't be a second person as beautiful as her. She was more beautiful than the women he had seen in his 2 lifetimes. His heart immediately warmed, but at this time he was burning with anxiety. In addition, his impression of Lu Yanqing wasn't very good. How could he be in the mood to look at a beauty? After his eyes slightly brightened, he asked with some doubt, "You are Senior Lu of Spirit Fang Valley?" 9th Xan secretly nodded his head in appreciation. The men who came to see his master, except for the terrifying old man from the demon ghost domain, were all stunned for a long time. But this Yu Qianqiu only revealed a trace of appreciation. He didn't lose his composure at all. He thought in his heart, someone who can be praised by third brother is indeed not someone ordinary people can compare to. Lu Yanqing was also somewhat surprised. This Yu Qianqiu was the second man who saw her true appearance and remained indifferent. Bai Changchun's taste in picking disciples was indeed not something ordinary people could compare to. Suddenly, as if he had found the long-lost feeling of being a normal person, he calmly nodded his head and said, "It's me. Yu Qianqiu, why are you chasing after my third brother?" No wonder the voice sounded familiar. It turned out to be Senior Lu. Yu Qianqiu shook his head and smiled bitterly. Looking at the direction third brother Xian disappeared in, he knew that he couldn't catch up. It seemed that he still needed the help of the people of Spirit Fang Valley. He immediately floated to the platform and cupped his hands in salute. "Greetings, Senior Lu. Senior Lu, please quickly send out all the people of Spirit Fang Valley to capture third brother Xian. We must not let him escape with the 7-star blood orchid. Otherwise something big will happen." 9th Xan flashed down and said strangely, "Yu Qianqiu, what did you say? You said that my third brother took away the 7-star blood orchid?" At this time it was face to face. After seeing Lu Yanqing's stunning appearance at a close distance, Yu Qianqiu exclaimed, "Senior Lu is worthy of being the world's first beauty. You really can't be compared to ordinary people." It was just a casual compliment. Lu Yanqing just wanted to say a few perfunctory words, but she saw Yu Qianqiu turn his head and roll his eyes at 9th Xan. "Can I still lie? Just before you blocked me, I saw him take away the 10 pots of blood orchid with my own eyes. I asked you to chase after him, but you blocked me instead. What should I say to you?" Lu Yanqing's expression slightly stiffened. She swallowed the words that reached her mouth. She was really speechless. It was the first time that a man saw his true appearance and ignored her. Seeing him praise her appearance, she wanted to say a few perfunctory words. Who knew that the other party's attention was not on her at all, so she did not have the chance to be perfunctory. It seemed that he was praising her perfunctorily, as if he did not put her appearance in his eyes at all. Chapter 698. Impossible. Old 9th Xan firmly denied, "My third brother would never steal master's things." Who would have thought that Lu Yanqing would sigh softly? It was Lao San who took away the 10 pots of blood orchid. Xan Laojiu was in the belly of the mountain before, perhaps he did not notice. But Lu Yanqing was in the small manor, and as soon as Xan Lao San flew near, she noticed. Xan Lao San took away 10 pots of blood orchid. Lu Yanqing felt strange. Although she didn't know the reason, she didn't believe that XN Laosan would do anything against her, so she didn't come out to stop him. Why didn't you stop him when you knew he took the blood orchid? Yu Qianqiu stared at Lu Yanqing and shouted. XN Laojiu was startled at first, then he frowned and said, Yu Qianqiu, watch your tone. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. He couldn't wait to rush up and give Lu Yanqing 2 slaps. At this time, no matter how beautiful Lu Yanqing was, she became a pile of dog shit in his eyes. However, he knew that he was no match for the 2 of them, so he suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a deep voice, Senior Lu, something big is going to happen. Lu Yanqing stared at Yu Qianqiu with clear eyes, and there was a trace of doubt in her heart. She seemed to see a trace of disgust in Yu Qianqiu's eyes. She had never seen a man show such a look to her, and did not know when she had offended him. She frowned and said, Yu Qianqiu, what exactly happened between you and third brother? With a gloomy face, Yu Qianqiu gritted his teeth and said, Yan Zhuixing is hiding in your Lingfang Valley. You probably don't know about it yet, do you? Lu Yanqing and XN Laojiu looked at each other in surprise. The former said strangely, This is not possible. How do you know that Yan Zhuixing is hiding in my Spirit Fang Valley? Although the 2 of them were surprised, they didn't seem to be disgusted by the fact that Yan Zhuixing was hiding in the Spirit Fang Valley. To the 2 of them, Yan Zhuixing had no enmity with them and was not involved in anything. So what if he was hiding in the Spirit Fang Valley? Looks like you guys don't care. Good. That's great. Very good. Yu Qianqiu pointed at the 2 of them and laughed angrily, wishing that he could engrave the word 38 on Lu Yanqing's seemingly beautiful face. Sometimes, beautiful things could be so hateful and unsightly, making people feel even worse. XN Laojiu's face darkened as he shouted, Impudent? Lu Yanqing raised her arm and stopped him from continuing. She said calmly, Yu Qianqiu, if you have anything to say, you can say it. Yu Qianqiu took a deep breath, calmed his emotions and said slowly, Yan Zhuixing is hiding in your Lingfang Valley to cultivate his demonic arts. His cultivation process is abnormally cruel, and he has sacrificed countless mortal girls' lives. Previously, I accidentally bumped into him and had a huge battle with him. He was severely injured by me and escaped. The 7-star blood orchid is the key to his cultivation of demonic arts. 4 of your disciples have been controlled by his demonic eyes and have become his puppet accomplices. Third brother Xin is one of them. What do you think he wants to do by stealing those 10 pots of blood orchid? What? Lu Yanqing and XN Laojiu exclaimed at the same time. This time the 2 of them could no longer calm down, and were even a little flustered. Yu Qianqiu still felt that the stimulation was not enough and said with a sneer, I forgot to tell Senior Lu, of your 4 disciples, other than third brother Xin, 3 have already been killed by Yan Zhuixing. If you don't want third brother Xin to die, I advise you to quickly send people to search the entire Lingfang Valley. He has already been seriously injured by me, and I don't think he can escape too far for the time being. What? The 2 of them exclaimed again. XN Laojiu lost his composure and said with a trembling voice, You said that Yan Zhuixing killed my 3 brothers? Yu Qianqiu naturally wouldn't admit that he was the one who killed them. He coldly said, I don't know if they were your elder brothers or not. I only heard third Xn call them 5th brother, 6th brother and 7th brother. Whether they were your elder brothers or not, it's up to you. XN Laojiu suddenly turned around and anxiously bowed to Lu Yanqing and begged, Master, whether it is true or not, please allow me to bring people to search. Bring all the people in the sect that can be used, and be sure to rescue third brother. Lu Yanqing said with a worried face. Yes. XN Laojiu cupped his hands and quickly left. After a while, hundreds of people flew out of Medicine Hut Mountain, and swept into the mountains. Yu Qianqiu withdrew his gaze from the crowd and stared at Lu Yanqing and said with a sneer, Senior Lu, don't you think that with the people of your Lingfang Valley, the hope of finding them in the vast mountains is very slim? I think it's better to find more people. The worried Lu Yanqing immediately came back to her senses and nodded in a panic, I will contact Wen Lanfeng and ask him to send people. For someone like her who had almost never suffered any disasters, although she had experienced a long time, her ability to cope with sudden changes was really not good. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. Although he heard that this woman had been rejecting Wen Lanfeng, it seemed that when she was in trouble, the first thing she thought of was Wen Lanfeng. However, Yu Qianqiu still felt that this was not safe. He was afraid that they would not be able to catch Yan Zhuixing if there were less people, so he immediately reminded her again, last time, so many people failed to catch Yan Zhuixing, and Wen Lanfeng's family is also difficult to deal with. I heard that Senior Lu has a wide range of contacts. for the safety of third brother Xian, it's better to invite people who can help. Lu Yanqing did not think too much and nodded repeatedly, quickly flashed into the small courtyard, and used the communication array to invite people everywhere. Yu Qianqiu. Just as Yu Qianqiu looked down the mountain, he suddenly heard someone calling him. Looking at the sound, he saw Enchantress of Charm and Yan Yu looking at him at the entrance of the courtyard. The two had actually been inside, and as soon as Yu Qianqiu arrived, they knew it was him. However, seeing Lu Yanqing and Xan Laojiu, two experts of soul formation stage, they did not dare to come over and disturb him. At this time, seeing that the two experts of soul formation stage had left, they appeared and slowly walked over. Seeing that the two women were safe and sound, Yu Qianqiu's mood suddenly improved a lot. In particular, the plain clothes that the two women had changed into, although it covered their graceful bodies, it added a bit of a different kind of charm to them. Seeing this, Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up and immediately said with a smile, "Are you two used to living here?" The two women nodded, indicating that they were fine. Yan Yu stared at him, a little hesitant to speak. Yu Qianqiu felt a little itchy in his heart, but he deliberately avoided her gaze, all because he did not know what to say. "Is that Yan Zhuixing really that dangerous?" Enchantress of Charm asked in a rare solemn tone. Obviously, she also heard the conversation between Yu Qianqiu and Lu Yanqing. Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank, his eyes swept across the two's face and slowly asked, "Have you seen Yan Zhuixing in Lingfang Valley?" The two shook their heads and Enchantress of Charm replied, "Other than walking around once when we first arrived, we have been following Senior Lu's side recently and learned a lot of things. As for Yan Zhuixing, we have never seen him. But just now, when I heard you mention third brother Xian, I remembered something. Some time ago he often said that he would bring us to the back mountain to have a look, but because we are women, it is not convenient for us to go with him to that remote place, so we refused. Now that I think about it, this matter is a little suspicious." Yu Qianqiu nodded and immediately let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that his worry was right. Yan Zhuixing really wanted to make a move on the two women through third brother Xian. Fortunately, the two of them had always been by Lu Yanqing's side, and did not give Yan Zhuixing a chance to make a move, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. Although that guy was seriously injured by me and escaped, there are some things that need to be prepared in advance. Yu Qianqiu solemnly reminded, "If you meet him, do not hold any hope, and immediately run as far as you can, especially when his eyes are glowing red. Especially when his eyes are glowing red, immediately avoid them. Do not look at them or your mind will be controlled by him and you will become his puppet." The two women's faces changed and they looked at each other with goosebumps. Enchantress of Charm asked again, "Is Yan Zhuixing really that scary? That guy's devil art is very strange. I reckon that no cultivator below the soul-forming stage can be his opponent. Last night he met me, so it was his bad luck." Yu Qianqiu reminded the two again, "Do not hold any hope, you did not see it with your own eyes, so you can't imagine how terrifying his devil art is. He was even able to come back to life and escape after being killed by me once. In short, you are definitely not his opponent. Third brother Xian and his senior brothers are all experts at the end of the tribulation passing stage, so you must learn from them. They can come back to life after dying?" The two women were shocked by his words and immediately paid attention to it and immediately agreed. The three of them then stood at the edge of the flat platform, facing the rising sun as they chatted idly. The mountain path in the distance was shrouded by the rising mist, and they could vaguely see many people heading towards the Spirit Fang Valley. After Yu Qianqiu noticed, he stretched out his hand and pointed and asked curiously, "What are those people doing?" Enchantress of Charm giggled and explained, "They are the poor people of the nearby countries. Because Spirit Fang Valley can treat people for free, they all come to seek medical advice." Yu Qianqiu slightly frowned. At this time, Lu Yanqing walked out of the manor, and Enchantress of Charm and Yan Yu immediately bowed and greeted, "Senior Lu." However, Yu Qianqiu pointed to the mountain path in the distance and said to Lu Yanqing, "Senior Lu, shouldn't you stop practicing medicine for a while? I'm afraid that the commotion here will shock the world." "Okay," Lu Yanqing said in a daze. Only then did she realize that there was no one to command her, and they had all gone into the mountains to find someone. After Yu Qianqiu glanced at them, he raised his eyebrows, turned to Enchantress of Charm and Yan Yu and said, "Persuade the people who came to go back, and if you can't persuade them to go back, then directly show your skills and rush back. Think of a way to seal the mountain path and set up a monument. Spirit Fang Valley has something important to do, and the valley will be sealed for a month." He did not need Lu Yanqing's consent, and directly helped her make the decision. Hearing this, the two women were speechless, thinking that this guy was too bold and could not help but look at Lu Yanqing. Lu Yanqing looked at Yu Qianqiu and seeing that he was so determined, she nodded. Only then did the two women quickly fly away. There were only two people left on the mountain plateau, and Yu Qianqiu indifferently stared at the woman beside him and asked, "Senior Lu, how is the helper you found?" Although he called her senior, there was no respect that should be given to a senior. Lu Yanqing was not in the mood to pay attention to this at this time, and her bright eyes swept over the empty Spirit Fang Valley. Her heart became more anxious and she sighed softly, "When Lan Feng has already brought people here. As for the others, I'm afraid they won't come for the time being." Yu Qianqiu was stunned and felt that something was wrong. Could it be that those greedy people did not want to rob Yan Zhuixing of the peerless cultivation method? He said in surprise, "Could it be that something big happened in the cultivation world again?" Lu Yanqing looked at him curiously and her black eyebrows slightly furrowed. "The opening of the East Holy Land is in the near future, and no one can be sure of the specific day. Maybe it will be a few days earlier, maybe it will be a few days later, anyway it will definitely be within this month. At this time, no one wants to make any big movements for fear of causing trouble for themselves, and many people have already rushed to the East Sea in advance, preparing to respectfully send Bai Changchun to the East Holy Land." Chapter 699. Yu Qianqiu was stunned on the spot. How could he forget such a big thing? For a long time he had been worrying about a lot of things, but there was one place that he didn't need to worry about. That was naturally the demon ghost domains by Changchun. The old guy was so awesome that he didn't need to worry about him at all. Because he was used to not having to do anything, he really forgot. However, he had some doubts in his heart. The old guy was going to leave. Why didn't he tell me? It shouldn't be. The two of them stopped talking. Lu Yanqing quietly looked at the unpredictable expression on his face. Suddenly she remembered the scene of this guy pointing fingers at her. He was really impolite, not giving her any face at all. And she didn't know what happened to her, but she listened to him in a daze. A trace of anger flashed across Lu Yanqing's face. Then she looked at Yu Qianqiu. She was angry, but she was also curious. This guy clearly had the biggest backing in the world, but he never revealed it. Otherwise, who in the cultivation world would dare to provoke him? How could he be chased everywhere? These two master and disciple were both strange people. Two figures flew back. The return of the 100 Charm Beauty and Yan Yu made the two of them come back to their senses. The 100 Charm Beauty looked at the two of them suspiciously. She seemed to have seen Lu Yanqing staring at Yu Qianqiu. This was nothing, but when she saw her and Yan Yu return, she looked away in a panic, giving people a feeling of guilt. Why did it feel a little ambiguous? Is everything done? Yu Qianqiu looked at the two women and asked. The 100 Charm Beauty smiled and said, "Yes." Yu Qianqiu paused, then suddenly cupped his hands towards Lu Yanqing and said, "Senior Lu, I have something to do first. I will leave the two of them to you." Lu Yanqing nodded slightly. In her heart, she had already guessed where he was going. Yu Qianqiu then said to the two women, "Here you'd better not run around. It's safer to follow Senior Lu." After saying that, he turned around and was about to leave, but then he seemed to think of something. He looked at the alluring temptress and said, "I have avenged Master Hao. You can rest assured." The 100 Charm Enchantress expression darkened and she said softly, "I've heard it from Senior Lu." Yu Qianqiu glanced at Lu Yanqing, then cupped his hands towards the few of them and said, "Goodbye." By the time when Lan Feng arrived at the Spirit Fang Valley with thousands of people, Yu Qianqiu had already appeared in the ghostly domain. Although he could directly teleport to Obedient Island, he still pretended to fly towards it. The reason he came here was to find out when his master would leave so that he could make the necessary preparations. Leaping over the surface of the lake, he could already see the Obedient Island in the distance. As he neared, he suddenly saw a purple shadow shooting towards him. Yu Qianqiu didn't even need to guess to know who it was. "Big liar." Ziyi chuckled and flashed to his side. She turned her head and asked, "Why are you back?" Yu Qianqiu was not interested in the way she addressed him. His face darkened and he rolled his dead fish eyes. With a voice that could not be any lighter, he said disdainfully, "It's none of your business." The reason why he lowered his voice was because he was worried about Nongzhu, who loved her daughter as much as her life. Ziyi immediately stopped smiling, and her pretty face turned cold. But Yu Qianqiu had already landed on the Obedient Island, standing face to face with Hibiscus, who was looking forward to seeing him. Miss Mu bowed to him. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand, indicating that there was no need to be so polite. He smiled at Hibiscus and said, I will go and greet Master first. Let's talk later. Okay. Hibiscus obediently replied and watched him walk towards the big house. Ziyi pulled her arm and said coldly, Hibiscus, ignore him. Hibiscus nodded with a smile like a flower. As soon as Yu Qianqiu walked into the big house, he saw Bai Changchun, who was sitting cross-legged in the center with his eyes closed. Nongzhu was sitting on the right side of Bai Changchun. She stretched and yawned, Boy, you are back. I was going to look for you on behalf of your master. Master, Senior Nongzhu. Yu Qianqiu bowed and sat on the left side of Bai Changchun, which was opposite to Nongzhu. They stared at each other, waiting for Bai Changchun to speak. No one knew what Bai Changchun was thinking. The house was quiet. After a long time, Bai Changchun opened his eyes. He looked at Yu Qianqiu and asked, What is it that you came back for? Yu Qianqiu was in awe, but he pretended to be generous and said, This time I came back because I have something to ask Master. He always remembered what Bai Changchun said after he killed He Li. Bai Changchun's evaluation of He Li was too polite. He remembered it when he saw Bai Changchun. Therefore, although he seemed to be respectful, he did not dare to be too polite. Before Bai Changchun opened his mouth, Nongzhu asked, What is it? Tell me about it. With a curious look on his face, he felt a little bored. Yu Qianqiu glanced at Bai Changchun. Seeing that the old man had no objection, he looked at Nongzhu and asked, Senior Nongzhu, do you remember Yan Zhuixing? Nongzhu smiled disapprovingly and said, He is your sworn enemy. Both of you went from the cultivation world of Wuxia to the cornucopia. If you didn't make him famous, I wouldn't care who he is. Tilting his head to look at Bai Changchun, he explained, He's the new disciple of Bing Qingzi. I've told you about him before. He's the one who was forced by your disciple to hide all day long. How pitiful. He then turned his head to ask Yu Qianqiu, What's wrong? Are you fighting against each other again? Hasn't he been defeated by you all the time? Can't you defeat him? You even asked your master. You think too highly of him, don't you? What a joke. Who does he think he is? Why can't I defeat him? Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said disdainfully, I happened to meet him before I came here. I seriously injured him and chopped off one of his arms. Unfortunately, he escaped. You are so useless. You seriously injured him and chopped off one of his arms, but you let him escape? Nongzhu sat up straight and asked excitedly, It can't be so simple. What's going on? Tell me. Yu Qianqiu frowned and said, I only know what devil art that fellow cultivates, and it's incomparably strange. Actually, before I injured him this time, I'd already killed him once. But the shocking thing is that he was actually able to come back to life after being turned into a dried corpse, and in the end he escaped. Master, have you ever heard of such an evil skill? Come back to life? Nongzhu was shocked and looked at Bai Changchun inquiringly. Bai Changchun was also a little surprised. He thought for a while and said slowly, It's said that there is a skill that can bring people back to life after death. But I don't know what it is. But I don't believe that someone with a shallow cultivation who can defeat you can cultivate to the realm of resurrection. That realm is close to the divine sense. I'm afraid that even the masters in the immortal realm can't do that. It's really incredible. Nongzhu poked her head and asked weakly, Old Bai, why don't you catch that guy and kill him again? So that you can confirm it again? I can also see what kind of resurrection skill it is. Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up and thought that it was a good idea. Bai Changchun glanced at them fiercely. They shrunk their heads and quickly extinguished their evil thoughts. They all knew that Bai Changchun was arrogant. As long as no one provoked him, he would not fight with such a junior. Unless Yan Zhuixing was a very powerful master who could make Bai Changchun have a strong desire to fight with him. But how could Bai Changchun take a fancy to a junior who could even defeat Yu Qianqiu? Nongzhu coughed awkwardly and changed the topic. She pointed at Yu Qianqiu and scolded, Why are you looking at me like that? Maybe you were fooled by his camouflage. Yu Qianqiu was unhappy when he heard that. When he was about to refute, Nongzhu changed her words and said, But it is also possible that the guy's devil kung fu is magical. He doesn't have to have a high cultivation. Yes, that guy's evil skill is really evil. Yu Qianqiu looked at Bai Changchun and nodded in agreement. Bai Changchun shook his head and said, Evil skill? What could truly be called demonic arts were the cultivation methods of the demonic cultivators in the ancient times, which were even more ancient than the ancient times. But the devil realm has been sealed for countless years. Until now, I've never heard of anyone practicing evil skill. How could there be evil skill without any sign? The devil realm? Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu were stunned at the same time. Both of them were confused. Nongzhu asked suspiciously, "Isn't there only the immortal realm, the underworld and the human realm? How come there is a devil realm and it's sealed? I've heard of even older legends. Why haven't I heard of the devil realm?" "I haven't heard of it before either. But when I took over the demon realm, the former torture envoy mentioned it." Bai Changchun sighed and said, "It's a horrible existence. It once dominated the three realms, and even the immortal realm and the underworld had to bow their heads to it. Later the devil realm was sealed. The immortal realm and the underworld joined hands to eradicate the evil cultivators in the human realm. They would rather kill the wrong people than let them go. So no one dared to mention the word devil realm, for fear of being implicated. Over time, the legend about the devil realm disappeared in the human realm." "The evil cultivators in the devil realm are so powerful?" Nongzhu swallowed and said, "Why haven't I heard you mention it before?" Bai Changchun glanced at Yu Qianqiu, who was in a daze. Nongzhu looked at him and immediately understood. It seemed that she had benefited from this guy. Bai Changchun mainly said it to him. Bai Changchun looked out of the door and said leisurely, "In ancient times evil cultivators wreaked havoc and formed their own way, which was called the devil realm. There was a top master of the devil realm who forcibly opened up a fourth realm apart from the immortal realm, the underworld and the human realm, which was called the devil realm. The cultivation of this top master of the devil realm was so powerful that it made the top masters of the immortal realm and the underworld tremble. In the end, he broke through the known peak of cultivation in the four realms and ascended to the legendary and illusory divine realm. This person was recognized as the first master of the devil realm since the beginning of the devil realm. He was called the devil god by the later generations of the devil realm." Chapter 700. The Devil God. Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu both murmured with fascination. A magnificent scene appeared in their minds, in which a peerless genius stood between heaven and earth. They couldn't see his face clearly, but the wind was blowing, the heroes were chasing after the deer, and the demons were dancing wildly, but he was the only one. Just think about it, during that era where experts were numerous like trees in a forest, how could a peerless genius who was able to look down upon all experts, shake the three dimensions with his might and forcefully open up a world of his own? How could others not be fascinated by him? Bai Changchun continued slowly, "It was also because he went to the divine realm that the devil realm lost its pillar. Many years later, the devil realm gradually declined, and finally the immortal realm and the underworld had the opportunity to raise their heads, which led to the fate of the devil realm being sealed." He sighed again and said, "It's a pity that we were not born at the right time, and couldn't see the peerless glory of the devil god. If we could fight with him we would die without regret." These words caused Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu to look at each other and roll their eyes. They muttered in their hearts, "Old fellow, you're biting off more than you can chew. Although you're formidable, you're still far behind the devil god. The devil god is a master of the divine realm. With your cultivation, are you qualified to fight with him?" The room was quiet, and Bai Changchun still looked leisurely and fascinated. Yu Qianqiu secretly glanced at him and quietly counted his fingers repeatedly. As a disciple, it was not appropriate for him to criticize his master for reaching beyond his grasp. Nongzhu suddenly coughed and smiled awkwardly. "Old Bai, the times are different and each has its own talent. Speaking of which, as the first master in the world, your status in the cultivation world is no different from that of the devil god. Many people admire you, so why do you admire the ancients? It's a little unrealistic. Let's think about the present and the future." Bai Changchun shook his head slightly and said firmly, "After learning the legend of the devil god from the former torture envoy, I often look up to the vast sky and have a goal to strive for in my life. I look forward to one day learning from the devil god, so that my cultivation will not be in vain. Maybe you think I'm a little ambitious, but I think it's not impossible because the great way is endless." The scope of the old man's goal was too great. Yu Qianqiu's eyes were focused on his nose was focused on his heart, his eyes were focused, he counted on his fingers without saying a word. Nongzhu couldn't help but murmur, "You won't be able to see the devil god. Wait until you see the demonic monarch, the immortal emperor, and the emperor of hell." I remember now. Yu Qianqiu suddenly raised his head and said, "Yan Zhuixing is related to the 10,000 demons, the number one sect in China's cultivation world. His father, Yan Bugui, is from the 10,000 demons, and his grandfather was the previous sect leader of the 10,000 demons. Master, do you think that the 10,000 demons are related to the ancient devil Tao?" These are two completely unrelated matters. Bai Changchun said indifferently, the current Devil Dao and the ancient Devil Dao are not the same thing. The real Devil Dao is quite complicated. Human, ghost, and demon can all be classified as Devil Dao. The reason why there were devil cultivators in ancient times is that after the world was created, those pioneers of cultivation had no standard cultivation methods. In order to survive in the savage and dangerous era, they had no choice but to create all kinds of cultivation techniques. Because they were pioneers of cultivation, no one gave them advice on how to avoid risks. Therefore, many people, demons and ghosts went astray and became possessed by the devil. These people, demons and ghosts who went astray and became possessed by the devil were collectively called devil cultivators. They were the pioneers of the Devil Dao. Among them there were many peerless talents and the devil god was the best. How could the current Devil Dao and the 10,000 demons compare to them? So that's how it is. Yu Qianqiu suddenly realized. Nongzhu clicked her tongue and said, I didn't expect that a group of people who went astray could suppress the people of the immortal world and the underworld. That's really amazing. Bai Changchun stared at him and snorted, even if they went astray and became possessed by the devil, do you think those who can create their own cultivation methods are ordinary people? Which one of them is not a peerless talent with a mind and talent beyond ordinary people? Because of the danger in the wild, except for those big tribes, many people live in a precarious state at any time. The cultivation methods created by these people are all aimed at quick success, bloodshed, brutality, killing, and great power. In order to save their lives, there is nothing they don't dare to do. After all, the Devil Dao is also forced out. Nongzhu nodded slowly and sighed, yes. It was only in that kind of precarious living environment that so many amazing talents could be produced. If it were now, who would dare to risk their lives to practice at random? There is no ready-made cultivation method to practice properly. Now I finally understand why countless amazing legends that can't be replicated always appear in that ancient and dangerous wild era. I couldn't figure it out before, but it turns out that they are all forced out. Respectable. What a group of people. No wonder they can suppress the immortal world and the underworld. Yu Qianqiu also nodded silently. If a person wasn't forced into a dead end, how many of them would risk their lives and take a risk out of desperation? This is similar to the saying in his previous life that heroes are born in troubled times. In a peaceful environment there are not so many heroes. Bai Changchun looked at Yu Qianqiu who was silent and asked, You came to me to ask about this? Yu Qianqiu suddenly came back to his senses. Seeing that his master and Nongzhu were staring at him, he scratched his head and said with an embarrassed smile, I heard that the Eastern Holy Land is about to open, so I came back to ask Master if you really want to go there. Yes. Bai Changchun nodded indifferently and said, I have contacted Ancestor Nanming of Shenzhen Island. In a few days I will go to Shenzhen Island to settle down temporarily and wait for the East Holy Land to open. Nongzhu's expression also became solemn. She stared at Yu Qianqiu and interrupted, Your master was about to ask me to call you back to talk about this. I didn't expect you to come back in advance. It saves me the trouble of looking for you everywhere. Yu Qianqiu asked weakly, Master, can't I not go? He knew clearly that once Bai Changchun left, his life would not be so good. Nongzhu nodded in agreement and said, Yes. Old Bai, think about it again. In any case, your current physical body has already extended your lifespan by another 200 years. With these 200 years, with your aptitude, it's not impossible for you to break through again. Why do you want to go to that place of no return? Isn't it pretty good here? As she said, she raised her hand and pointed at Yu Qianqiu and said, Once you leave, this guy will be in big trouble. He has offended so many people. There are a lot of people who want to kill him. Yu Qianqiu nodded honestly and said, Yes. Yes. Nongzhu, you worry too much. Bai Changchun said calmly, Even if you and I are killed, it is not certain that anyone can kill him. Yu Qianqiu was stunned and then said with a bitter smile, Master, aren't you mocking me? Nongzhu looked up and down at Yu Qianqiu as if she was looking at a monster. She knew that Bai Changchun would not lie. There must be a reason for him to say such a thing. Bai Changchun said indifferently, I heard from Nongzhu that when you were expelled from Anquangtsung, you had a close relationship with a white fox who had been cultivating for 1,000 years. You also wrote several songs for her. Is that true? Nongzhu was a little confused. When she knew that Yu Qianqiu, the scum of the cultivation world, was accepted as a disciple by Bai Changchun, she told Bai Changchun about the story of this scum of the cultivation world. It had been a long time. She didn't know why Bai Changchun brought it up again. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He also didn't know why Bai Changchun asked this question. He thought it was not a secret, so he nodded and admitted it. That's right. Bai Changchun stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, I'll tell you one thing and you'll understand. Many years ago, I comprehended a set of incantations somewhere in the cultivation world of Wuxia. I accidentally hid a treasure from a deep mountain. After I carefully examined it, I understood what it was. For this thing to fall into my hands, it might be the will of the heavens that it belongs to me. When I was hesitating whether to rely on myself or the treasure, a white fox who had been cultivating for 1,000 years suddenly rushed in. Maybe it was attracted by the movement of my cultivation. Looking back on my life of cultivation, I always relied on myself. There was no need to rely on treasures. At that time, I made up my mind to abandon the treasure and watched it be taken away by the white fox. When I accepted you as a disciple, I was just curious about your abnormality. I wanted to explore it slowly. Later, combined with the relationship between you and the white fox that Nongzhu told me, I immediately guessed that the thing in the white fox's hands was in your hands. If this isn't God's will, then what is? I didn't expect that the thing that I didn't want would come to me in a roundabout way. Moreover, it appeared at the right time. Yu Qianqiu, do you understand what I'm talking about now? Nongzhu was confused. She interrupted first and said, What are you talking about? Bai Changchun's words were very obvious. How could Yu Qianqiu not know what he was talking about? He was naturally referring to the golden bead. He was a little dumbfounded. It seemed that the old man already knew that he had the golden bead. From what he said, he seemed to know the use of the golden bead. Master, I really didn't mean to hide it. Yu Qianqiu immediately got up and knelt down. He was a little panicked. This old man couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes. He was even prepared to run away. Bai Changchun waved his hand and said, This thing is extraordinary. It's right not to say it. Don't mention it to anyone in the future. You will need it for many things in the future. I can also go to the Eastern Holy Land with peace of mind because of it. If the heavens have feelings, the heavens will also grow old. This is God's will. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu's beating heart finally calmed down. He then asked suspiciously, Master, what is this thing called? What are its uses? Bai Changchun was stunned. He stared deeply at Yu Qianqiu for a while and said slowly, Since you don't know, then don't ask any more. When the time comes, you will naturally know. This is God's will. You don't need to ask anyone. Do you understand? Chapter 701. It would be strange if he could understand it. Yu Qianqiu answered submissively. In fact, he hated it when people talked about God's will. If so, he deserved to be killed by lightning in his previous life. He was depressed at the thought of it. However, it was strange that the golden bead that Bai Suzhen gave him belonged to Bai Changchun. After it fell into his hands, he became Bai Changchun's disciple. It was really a big circle. Nongzhu felt that she had missed something wonderful. She asked anxiously, What treasure are you talking about? Tell me about it. Bai Changchun glanced at her and said, Don't ask about things that you shouldn't know. Nongzhu's face fell immediately. She said in a muffled voice, Old Bai, you are not a good friend. Why are you still hiding it from me when you've already said so much? Bai Changchun ignored her and said quietly, After I leave, the demon realm needs the next torture envoy. Hearing this, the room suddenly became quiet. Yu Qianqiu began to count his fingers again. To be honest, he was not interested in the torture envoy of the demon realm at all. It seemed that the responsibility was more important than the benefits. Nongzhu was no longer angry. She turned her head casually and looked out of the door. She murmured, The weather outside seems good. Yu Qianqiu, from today on, I will hand over the demon realm to you. Bai Changchun said bluntly, without any beating around the bush. Nongzhu was stunned for a moment, and then let out a sigh of relief. She cupped one hand in the other before her chest to Yu Qianqiu, whose face was full of astonishment, and jokingly said, Yu Qianqiu, congratulations. Congratulations on finally becoming the world-famous torture master of the demon region. Yu Qianqiu came to himself and waved his hands repeatedly. Master, I can't do it. I really can't do it. You'd better give it to someone else. Bai Changchun said with a blank face, Oh, who do you think is suitable? Yu Qianqiu pointed at Nongzhu without hesitation. There were only 3 people here. If he did not drag Nongzhu down with him, who else would he drag? Yu Qianqiu said eloquently, Senior Nongzhu's cultivation is higher than mine, and she has many friends in the cultivation world. If there is any trouble, she can find many people to help her. I can't do that. I have a lot of enemies to begin with, and I have a lot of problems to deal with. I don't have the time to manage the devil domain. The burden is too heavy for me to bear. Bullshit. Nongzhu immediately jumped up, pointed at Yu Qianzhou's nose and scolded, "Don't involve me in the matter between you two or don't blame me for being rude." Yu Qianzhou gritted his teeth. If it wasn't for Bai Changchun he would have scolded him back. Bai Changchun gently waved his hand and said, "Nongzhu, you go out first. I need to talk to him alone." Nongzhu rolled her eyes and sat down. She said with a smile, "Old Bai, you really have a lot of secrets. What secrets do you have? Let me listen to them. I promise I won't disturb you too. I'll only bring my ears and not my mouth." You change your face faster than turning the page of a book. What a fickle villain. Yu Qianzhou pointed at the mulberry tree and scolded the locust tree. Nongzhu's expression didn't change. She kept her mouth shut and let him scold her with a smile. She had entered the state of only bringing her ears and not her mouth. Who would have thought that Bai Changchun would only say a few words, and he would immediately flee in defeat? Bai Changchun said, "Some secrets can only be told to the next torture envoy of the devil domain. If you really want to hear it, I'll take it that you agree to be the next torture envoy." Watching Nongzhu leave, Yu Qianzhou suddenly became listless. Bai Changchun waved his hand, and the soundproof bounded domain was instantly formed. Nongzhu wandered outside the room for a while. She knew that it was impossible for her to eavesdrop under Bai Changchun's nose with her cultivation. She waved her hand and walked out. But when she saw Ziyi chatting with Hibiscus by the 1,000-mile lake, she suddenly became worried. Although she didn't want to be the torture envoy of the devil domain for Ziyi's sake, she didn't want Yu Qianzhou to be the torture envoy. If the news that Yu Qianzhou was in charge of the devil domain was spread out, the devil domain would definitely become the target of public criticism. Because Yu Qianzhou's cultivation was too weak to deter those with ulterior motives. The vast devil domain would probably become a hot spot for all forces to compete for. Yu Qianzhou's fate was worrying. Without Bai Changchun's deterrence, those experts at the late stage of Huashan realm would be like wild horses running wild in the cultivation world. Few people in the world could restrain them. Nongzhu admitted that she couldn't stop them with her cultivation. The only way was to ask Wen Lanfeng to take charge, but this was not a long-term solution. What was Bai Changchun thinking? He actually dared to give such a heavy responsibility of the devil domain to Yu Qianzhou. Wasn't he afraid that Yu Qianzhou would mess it up and even lose his life? This was simply harming him. Nongzhu shook her head in confusion, but then she remembered what Bai Changchun said before. Did Yu Qianzhou really have a life-saving magic weapon? Logically speaking, Bai Changchun was not a person who made rash decisions. There must be a reason for him to do so. Thinking of this, Nongzhu was more or less confident. Even so, he kept walking around the island, anxiously waiting for the result of the conversation between the master and the disciple in the center of the island. He hoped that the conversation between the master and the disciple would break down and Bai Changchun would not leave. That would be the best result. It should be known that once Bai Changchun left, the world would be in chaos. The sun went from high in the sky to the west and then from the west to the night. Until the night was full of stars and the bright moon was in the sky, there was no movement in the room. Nongzhu didn't know what the master and the disciple were talking about for such a long time. Farong and Ziyi were also a little impatient. They asked Nongzhu several times, but Nongzhu just answered perfunctorily. So the two girls returned to the lake, back to back, and stayed up for the night. When the sun shone from the east again, the conversation between the master and the disciple in the room came to an end. Yu Qianzhou didn't know when he moved to the opposite side of Bai Changchun. The master and the disciple talked face to face for nearly a whole day. Yu Qianzhou sat quietly in the same place, digesting the secrets that belonged to the former torturers. Bai Changchun said a lot during the day's conversation, and Yu Qianzhou also asked a lot of questions. Bai Changchun answered all his questions. The more he knew, the more serious Yu Qianzhou looked. He didn't expect that the devil domain had so many secrets. That's right, master. Yu Qianzhou suddenly raised his head and said, "There's something I forgot to ask, master. I once followed the flame eye of Twilight Valley's blue fire underground and saw a few inconceivable things." Bai Changchun froze. There's something under the flame eye of the blue fire? What did you see? Even master doesn't know. Yu Qianzhou found this rather strange, and then he gestured with his hand. Below that is a massive underground space flowing with lava. It's an extremely spectacular sight. Several massive blue lotuses grew on the river of lava, and Twilight Valley's blue fire came from these lotuses. Most inconceivable of all was that there was a naked child sleeping on one of the lotuses, not the slightest bit afraid of the blue fire. Bai Changchun stroked his beard and said, "You mean to say that the child was sleeping naked in the blue fire?" "Yes. There's something even more inconceivable than that." Yu Qianqiu clicked his tongue. "At the time, I struck the child awake, but who knew that the child would jump straight into the roiling lava as if he were swimming in a river? Because I struck him, the child dived into the lava and found a helper. The helper he found was too frightening. It was a savage, majestic, and dignified dragon. Damn, this is the first time in my life that I've seen a living dragon." "A dragon?" Bai Changchun suddenly stood up and gravely asked, "Are you sure you didn't see wrong? It really was a dragon?" Yu Qianqiu also stood up and gestured at the dragon's appearance. It should have been a dragon, and a red one at that. Its entire body was covered in bright red scales, and I could sense a majestic and ancient aura the moment it appeared. But strangely, I seemed to see that the dragon's claws were locked down by dazzling golden chains, and the chains seemed to be connected to the bottom of the lava. I don't know if I saw wrong, but who would have the ability to lock down a dragon? I was scared out of my wits and didn't dare to look further, so I used the miraculous effect of the golden bead to escape. After gesturing, Yu Qianqiu asked again, "Master, didn't you say that the dragon mount of the Myriad Swords Demon Lord was red? Could that dragon be the one that belonged to the Myriad Swords Demon Lord?" Bai Changchun pondered for a while and slowly nodded. "It should be. I didn't expect the legend to be true." He then turned to Yu Qianqiu and explained, "The previous torture envoy mentioned it once. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten about it. Regarding that dragon, there are two theories. The premise is that the Myriad Swords Demon Lord was severely injured. The first theory is that the Myriad Swords Demon Lord knew that he couldn't hold on any longer, so he gave the dragon its freedom, and the dragon soared into the sky. This matter was too mysterious." Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but ask, "Could the second theory be that the dragon was locked underground?" "The second theory doesn't make sense. Otherwise, the first torture envoy who knew what happened would know where the dragon was, unless he deliberately kept it a secret. Now it seems that he must have witnessed what happened with his own eyes, but he deliberately hid it and passed it down as a legend." Bai Changchun explained, "This theory is also because the Myriad Swords Demon Lord knew that he couldn't hold on any longer, so he was afraid that the dragon would avenge him on impulse. He knew that the dragon was no match for him, so he locked it deep underground. At the same time, he told the dragon that retribution is inevitable. When someone has the ability to break the shackles he placed on the dragon and release it, that person will be the fated person who has the ability to avenge the Myriad Swords Demon Lord. The dragon will then come out and help the fated person to avenge the Myriad Swords Demon Lord." "That doesn't make sense." Yu Qianqiu rubbed his chin and raised his eyebrows. How could others know about the conversation between the Myriad Swords Demon Lord and the dragon? Those who knew about it were either there at the time, or the Myriad Swords Demon Lord passed on the message. The former is more likely. Otherwise, the Myriad Swords Demon Lord would have no reason to tell others about the agreement between him and the dragon. There's no need to speculate anymore. Bai Changchun sighed. Since you've already seen the dragon underground, it means that the second theory is true. I didn't expect that. The dragon has always been underground in the demon domain, keeping its promise with the Myriad Swords Demon Lord and waiting for the fated person. I really don't know how it survived such a long time. Chapter 702. On the side, Yu Qianqiu sighed endlessly. Divine dragons were locked underground not for hundreds or thousands of years, but for tens of thousands of years at every turn. Who could say for sure how many years had passed since the ancient times, but it was probably more than 100,000 years. It was terrifying to think about being locked up for so many years. Just as he was shaking his head with his master, Yu Qianqiu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said excitedly, "Master, why don't we think of a way to release the divine dragon? Think about it. We're both abiding by the agreement with the Demon Lord of 10,000 Swords, so we should be on the same side. A divine dragon, a god-tier expert. With a divine dragon guarding the devil domain, who in the world would dare to do anything to the devil domain? Hee. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. Even he admired his own cleverness for coming up with such a good idea. He couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. Bai Changchun looked at him speechlessly. It was hard to associate his disciple's expression with that of a good person. He then said coldly, "It's true that the divine dragon's cultivation is high, but don't misunderstand. The divine dragon is also a member of the divine beasts. Just because it has the word divine doesn't mean it's a god-tier expert. Yu Qianzhou's sinister laughter stopped abruptly, and his expression twitched. Master, you mean that the divine dragon isn't necessarily very powerful? Bai Changchun nodded. It's not that it's not powerful, but the so-called divine beasts are beasts with supernatural powers. They have innate advantages that other beasts can't compare to. After cultivation, they all have the possibility of reaching the god tier. As for other beasts, it's not so easy to reach the god tier. The divine dragon's cultivation definitely hasn't reached the god tier. You should know that the demon lord of 10,000 swords didn't even reach the god tier when he died. Think about it, how could he control a god tier dragon? If the divine dragon really reached the god tier, the demon lord of 10,000 swords wouldn't have died with the divine dragon protecting him. Even with the myriad swords demon monarch's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to trap the divine dragon underground for so many years. I'm afraid that the divine dragon has already broken free from its shackles and escaped. Even if its cultivation hasn't reached the god level, it's probably many times stronger than the experts in the cultivation world, right? Yu Qianzhou said weakly. Judging from his tone, he seemed to be unwilling to give up. It seemed like he really wanted to get a divine dragon to protect him. Bai Changchun nodded slightly and said, the masters of the cultivation world definitely can't be compared to the divine dragon. Although the divine dragon is not a match for the immortal emperor and the emperor of the underworld, it is still qualified to fight against them. Think about it, how can the masters of the cultivation world be compared to it? At least my current cultivation is definitely not comparable to the divine dragon. Then isn't it just right to let it out to guard the demon region? Yu Qianzhou finally couldn't help but voice his desire. At this time, his mind was not thinking about letting the dragon god protect the devil's domain. Instead, he was thinking about building a relationship with the dragon god. When the time came, he would have the final say in the cultivation world. He could do whatever he wanted and he would not have to work so hard anymore. I advise you to give up on this idea. Bai Changchun stared at him coldly and said in a deep voice, the world is full of changes. The dragon god has been detained for so many years. No one knows what it is thinking now. Can you guarantee that it will be a good thing if it is released? Once its bestial nature is unleashed, it will definitely bring disaster to the whole world. When that time comes, who can control it? Can you control it? This must be one of the reasons why the demon lord of swords detained it. Moreover, the shackles that the demon lord of swords set on the dragon god cannot be broken with the dragon god's cultivation. Do you think that the two of us can break it with our cultivation? I was just saying it casually. If it doesn't work, then forget it. Yu Qianzhou smiled awkwardly. He was also shocked when he thought of the scene of the red guy roaring to the world and going berserk. He was just thinking of using the gold technique that he cultivated to try and break the shackles of the dragon god. Now it seemed that it was better to let the dragon continue to stay underground. He did not want to go for wool and come home shorn. When the time came, he would not be able to help but become a scourge instead. I have told you everything that needs to be said. If there is nothing else. Bai Changchun looked out the door slowly and sighed leisurely. Then, my mission is completed. It is time to go. He had always been calm, but now his words were filled with complicated emotions. Yu Qianzhou closed his lips tightly and looked at his master who was sighing. He was a little speechless. No matter how cold-hearted his master was, leaving this place where he had stayed for thousands of years would be a little emotional. According to his master, he was the one who had been in charge of the demon region for the longest time among all the torturers. Moreover, his master was not a cold-hearted person. He was just a warm person on the inside and cold on the outside. Yu Qianzhou slowly lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, Master, why don't you not leave? I'm afraid I can't handle it alone. In fact, I wanted to leave 300 years ago. Unfortunately, I haven't found a suitable person to take charge of the demon region. That's why it has been delayed until now. Bai Changchun showed a rare smile and said with a faint smile, now it is time to leave. I believe you can do it well. Even if you can't do it well, there must be a reason for this. Yu Qianzhou looked up and said, Master, don't you think Senior Wen Lanfeng is more suitable to take charge of the demon region? He is not a bad person. No one in the cultivation world is his match except for you. I want someone who can shoulder a heavy burden, not a good person. If a good person can solve the problem, there are many better people in the world. Why do I need to find him? Bai Changchun snorted and said, even if you didn't appear, Wen Lanfeng would at most be my second choice. I spared his life twice just in case. If there is no other way, I will let him take charge of the demon region. Yu Qianqiu was stunned and could not help asking, why? Bai Changchun showed an air of arrogance and said, when Lan Feng, this person's cultivation talent is indeed good compared to others. In terms of cultivation, he is indeed suitable to take charge of the demon region. But this person is decisive. A woman can make him dizzy. He has a gentle personality and lacks ruthlessness in handling things. As a person who controls the overall situation, these are his fatal weaknesses. If he takes charge of the demon region, he will be used by people with ulterior motives sooner or later. If I really entrust the demon region to him, I am afraid I will first have to massacre all the soul formation masters in the world before I can be more or less relieved. But even so, it is not a long-term solution. A fatal weakness is a fatal weakness and it is difficult to change. If I kill this group of people who can use him, there will be another group of people who can use him. I can't kill everyone in the world for the demon region, right? As he said this, he looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, but you are different. I have been silently observing you for a long time. On the surface you do things by hook or by crook to achieve your goals. You are even cruel and merciless, but you always have a kind heart. This prevents you from being unable to control your ambition and becoming an ambitious person. A person who controls the overall situation can't be soft-hearted. You should be decisive when things happen. Thunder and blood are all means, not results, so you must know right from wrong, good from evil, and right from wrong. In this regard, you are more suitable to take charge of the demon region than Nongzhu. As for other reasons I will not say. Damn it, is this a compliment or a scolding? Yu Qianqiu touched his nose awkwardly and quickly changed the topic. Then who is the first candidate? Is it Senior Nongzhu? Yes, not only did the former punishment commissioner take a fancy to him, but so did I. Bai Changchun snorted and said, I wanted Nongzhu to take over, but this guy has been running away. For this reason, he even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to the late stage of soul formation. He really wants to live a carefree life. Don't look down on Nongzhu. Nongzhu's talent for cultivation is not worse than Wen Lanfeng's, and it is even better. He only suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to prevent me from finding a reason to let him take over as the punishment commissioner. Does he think that I can't see through him? I guess after I leave, even if it is to protect himself, he will not take long to break through to the late stage of soul formation. That's good. You can have a helper. Damn it, you win. Yu Qianqiu hated Nongzhu very much. In order to escape responsibility, he even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through. Damn it, you set me up. No, I can't let him take advantage of me. Master. After careful consideration, I think Senior Nongzhu is more suitable to take charge of the demon region. Then he patted his chest and promised, Master, don't worry. Leave it to me. I have a way to make him accept the position of punishment commissioner. I will go to him now. No need. Bai Changchun stopped him coldly and looked outside the door. He said expressionlessly, he is destined to have a relationship with the demon region in this life. No matter how far he runs, he has to come back. Then he stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, isn't it good to have a master at the late stage of soul formation to run errands for you? Yu Qianqiu felt wronged and said, that guy is very cunning. He often goes against me now. Once he breaks through to the late stage of soul formation, how can I order him around? You don't have to worry about that. Even if he pretends to be stupid, there will be someone who can order him around. Bai Changchun snorted and said, does he think that he can live freely for the rest of his life without being in charge of the demon region? What a joke. What you owe me, you better pay me back. Yu Qianqiu looked at Bai Changchun suspiciously. It was the first time that he heard Bai Changchun say something like this. He seemed to smell a trace of conspiracy. He had a premonition that Nongzhu's life in the future would not be so easy. The old guy had obviously dug a trap for Nongzhu. A trap dug by the world's top master. Damn it, she would definitely be killed. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed when he thought that Nongzhu would be in trouble. But when he thought that he would have to shoulder more responsibilities, he couldn't be happy anymore. What a bitter life. Seeing his bitter face, Bai Changchun put down his hands behind his back and stretched out one hand. He opened his palm and showed a bunch of silver balls. He said calmly, if these things really have the effect you said, you can come to me if you really have any trouble that you can't solve. Of course, the premise is that I am still alive. Chapter 703. Ah, Master is the #1 expert in the world. No matter how mysterious the East Holy Land is, it's still in this world. Who can hurt Master? If there's any trouble, I'll definitely come to you. Yu Qianqiu answered bluntly, his face smiling like a chrysanthemum. Since Bai Changchun already knew about the golden bead, Yu Qianqiu also tactfully told Bai Changchun about the space of the golden bead and gave him a lot of silver beads. His original idea was to take advantage of Bai Changchun's convenience to go to the East Holy Land and find a chance to gain experience there. How could he forget that he could still invite this great master back if there was any trouble? My trump card is still there, I'm not afraid. The happy Yu Qianqiu was already imagining. Some people really went too far when he invited Bai Changchun back. Oh my god. That scene will definitely be very exciting, sweetheart. This guy was actually secretly looking forward to someone coming to the demon region to find trouble. But he was more or less worried that something would happen to Bai Changchun in the East Holy Land. The evil smile on his face betrayed his thoughts. Seeing him like this, Bai Changchun's face turned cold and he said in a low voice, "Don't come to me if you can solve the problem yourself. Go out and call Ziyi here. I have something to talk to her alone." Seeing that the old guy was angry, Yu Qianqiu's heart trembled and his smile froze. He nodded and bowed and hurriedly ran out. Once out of the big house, his steps became leisurely again, and he walked calmly to the side of the 1,000 Miles Lake. The few people by the lake all noticed him and flashed over. Looking at his proud face, they didn't know what treasure he had picked up. Nongzhu touched her chin and was puzzled. Previously, in order to refuse the position of torture envoy, this guy fought with her so fiercely. Why did he look so relaxed now? Could it be that this cunning guy got rid of the position? Her man finally came out. Furong's eyes were smiling, more beautiful than the crescent moon at night. Ziyi asked with an envious face, "Yu Qianqiu Senior Bai talked to you alone for such a long time. Did he teach you something good again?" She knew that Bai Changchun had always treated people coldly and was a man of few words. It was simply unheard of for him to talk through the night like this. Yu Qianqiu acted like a vile person who had the upper hand. He pointed at Ziyi's beautiful nose and said, "My master has something to say to you in private. Hurry up, don't make my master unhappy." Ah. Ziyi's mouth was wide open. She had never spoken to Elder Bai alone before, and now he actually summoned her. Ziyi was excited and nervous at the same time. She was at a loss of what to do. She stammered, "Really? I'll go now." Nongzhu rolled her eyes and looked at Ziyi hurriedly rushing to the big house and respectfully entering the door. Why was Ziyi's words more effective than her own master's? Yu Qianqiu strolled to the lakeside and began to do some broadcasted gymnastics exercises. He looked at the vast demon domain in the distance and was in a good mood. From today onwards, this is my territory. Nongzhu and Furong looked at each other. Then Nongzhu flashed over and pretended to accompany him to do chest stretching exercises. She asked casually, "That Yu Qianqiu? Why did your master call Ziyi in?" Without turning his head, Yu Qianqiu said, "How would I know? You can ask Ziyi later." Being rejected, Nongzhu was not angry. She said, "What did you say to old Bai? Why did you take so long to speak? What did they say? Tell me and I'll see if I can give you some advice." Yu Qianqiu withdrew his arm and turned around to look at her. He asked, "Do you really want to know?" Nongzhu looked back at the direction of the big house guiltily and said in a low voice, "Don't worry. I just want to listen and give you some advice. I won't tell anyone. If you don't believe me, I can swear." Yu Qianqiu snorted and stared at him and said with a cold smile, "You're also too despicable. My master said that he had found out long ago that you suppressed your cultivation and didn't break through in order to avoid being a torture master. You're so boring. If you don't want to be a torture master, just give up. Why do you have to play tricks with your old friend? Touch your own conscience and tell me, how can you feel at ease?" The wind was blowing by the lake and Nongzhu's heart was a little cold. Bai Changchun had found out long ago, but he didn't mention it. What was he up to? Thinking of Bai Changchun's means, every time he talked to her, he looked at her with a sneer in his heart. Nongzhu immediately shivered. Based on his character, he was really tolerant of her for so many years and didn't punish her. Nongzhu felt lucky and thanked Bai Changchun for his generosity, but she felt that something was wrong. She looked at the direction of the big house guiltily again and asked in a low voice, "Yu Qianqiu, don't fool me. You can't talk about me for so long, can you? What else? You know, there are some words that can't be said to you." Yu Qianqiu left after saying that and went to flirt with Furong. Nongzhu pulled a long face. Not long after, Ziyi came out. She had a serious expression on her face. She walked over and looked at Yu Qianqiu firmly as if saying, "I will support you." Yu Qianqiu was confused and didn't know what Bai Changchun had said to her. Nongju immediately went over with a smile and asked, "My dear apprentice, what did Senior Bai say to you? Come on, tell me so that I can give you some advice." Ziyi's firm eyes softened and she pouted her mouth in grievance. "Master, I promised Senior Bai that I wouldn't tell anyone. Don't force me, okay?" Nongju's face was completely dark. The muscles on her face twitched for a while, but she still squeezed out a smile and said, "Ha, don't be angry, Z. I won't force you." In fact, behind the smile, two tightly clenched fists were making a muffled sound. Yu Qianqiu, that brat, did not say anything, but even his own disciple did not pay attention to him. However, he dared to wrong anyone, but he could not bear to wrong Ziyi. Thus, he could only let himself be wronged and sulk. Seeing this scene, Yu Qianqiu turned around and smiled, like a fox that had stolen a chicken. He was happy to see Nongju being defeated. "Nongju." By Changchun's voice, Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around and saw that Bai Changchun had appeared here at some point in time. The expressions of the juniors became respectful. Nongju said with a gloomy face, "What's the matter?" Bai Changchun stared at him with a faint smile and said slowly, "We have known each other for many years. From today on, I'm afraid we have to separate." There was a touch of nostalgia in his tone. It was not easy to hear such a tone from Bai Changchun's mouth. Nongju was stunned, and his face returned to normal in an instant. All his anger disappeared. Of course, he knew what Bai Changchun's words meant. He was really going to leave for the place that he had never returned from since ancient times. The world's most powerful master for more than 1,000 years, the old friend that he had known for many years, was bidding farewell to him. The past was still vivid in his mind. Thinking back to the time when he traveled through space and time, the originally blurry memories and the things that he usually couldn't even remember suddenly appeared in front of his eyes as if it was only yesterday. He remembered that he had tricked him to come to the demon ghost region, but he had restrained the world's most powerful master for 1,000 years. He had shouldered the burden that belonged to him. He had let him down. He owed it to him. "Senior Bai." Ziyi whimpered. Her eyes were red and big drops of tears fell down. Her shoulders trembled and she covered her mouth as she sobbed. She looked at the world's most powerful master with tears in her eyes. She thought about the place he was going to and that she would never see him again. She couldn't control her emotions. Although she had heard that Senior Bai would go to the East Holy Land one day, she didn't expect it to be so soon. Senior Bai had just told her personally. Furong was shocked. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she suddenly realized that the atmosphere was not right. Ziyi was crying, and there was a sense of separation between them. Nongju's lips were tightly shut, and she turned to look at the crying Ziyi. Obviously she already knew. He put his hand on Ziyi's shoulder, stared at Bai Changchun and said with a smile, "Old Bai you?" His voice was a little hoarse and his throat was a little dry. He couldn't finish his words and his face tightened. Yu Qianqiu, who knew what was going on, didn't feel anything, but the atmosphere made him feel uncomfortable. He stood at the side and scratched his head. Suddenly he saw Furong's bewildered expression. He immediately pushed Furong lightly and said, "Master has always favored you. Quickly kowtow to Master." Furong's expression became more and more confused. She didn't know why she had to kowtow for no reason. However, she always listened to Yu Qianqiu's words unconditionally. She immediately knelt down and kowtowed to Bai Changchun. After 3 kowtows, Bai Changchun waved his hand, and Furong couldn't continue kowtowing anymore. She was lifted up by a gentle airflow without any resistance. Hibiscus looked at Yu Qianqiu as if she wanted to say something. Yu Qianqiu smiled at her, indicating that it was fine. Nongju Shuntian Island might not be peaceful during this period of time. Bring Furong and Ziyi to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest for the time being. As for the rest, Yu Qianqiu will naturally arrange it. Bai Changchun said with a faint smile. Furong looked at Yu Qianqiu again and revealed a puzzled expression as if asking, "Why do you want me to leave?" Yu Qianqiu gave her a look, indicating that she should listen to him. Furong immediately didn't have any objections. "Old Bai, there's no need to be so anxious." Nongju looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, "If I leave, what will happen to him?" "Leave now, don't make me say more." Bai Changchun looked at the boundless 1,000-mile lake, and nodded slightly as he looked around. His usually cold face actually maintained a faint smile. Occasionally, a trace of reluctance and longing could be seen in his moving eyes, but it disappeared in a flash. After looking around, his expression suddenly became resolute, and his eyes suddenly looked towards the east. His bright and spirited eyes revealed an unswerving determination to pursue. Chapter 704. Nongju stood there for a long time with a complicated expression. Then she walked away resolutely, threw out a ship-shaped flying celestial device and jumped on it. Nongju stood at the bow of the ship with her back to Bai Changchun, motionless and silent. Yu Qianqiu sighed slightly and pushed Furong and Ziyi towards the flying celestial device. Furong was at a loss, while Ziyi kept looking back with tears in her eyes. After Yu Qianqiu half-forcibly put them on the celestial device, Ziyi finally couldn't help but kneel down. She leaned on the string of the ship and cried bitterly, "Senior Bai." No matter how sad Ziyi was crying, the celestial device flew into the sky with a whoosh. Nongju didn't look back from beginning to end. She didn't even say a word. She just stood straight at the bow of the ship and drove the celestial device towards the south. Yu Qianqiu quietly walked to Bai Changchun and said, "Master, they're gone." He was obviously talking nonsense. With Bai Changchun's cultivation, how could he not know that they're gone? Bai Changchun looked back at Yu Qianqiu expressionlessly and nodded. Yu Qianqiu took a few steps back, cupped his hands and bowed to him solemnly. When he straightened up again, the person in front of him had already disappeared. A black spot in the sky quickly disappeared towards the east. Shuntian Island suddenly became very quiet. Yu Qianqiu slowly turned around and looked around. The sun was still shining, the 1,000-mile lake was still sparkling, the wind was still blowing, and the grass and trees on the island were still lush and swaying gently. When his eyes fell on the big house in the center of the island, he stopped. The old man who had been sitting in the house for thousands of years had really left. This place belonged to him now. It was like a dream. He actually became the master of this place. What an incredible thing. He was now the 108th torture master of the demon ghost region. Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt suffocated. He suddenly turned to the east and shouted loudly, "Master?" His voice echoed in all directions. He suddenly ran to the lakeside, opened his arms and sang loudly towards the boundless 1,000-mile lake. The great river flows to the east. The stars in the sky join the Big Dipper. We're leaving just like that. You have it, I have it, we have it all. Seeing injustice on the road, he roared. When it's time to make a move, make a move. Rushing through the 9 prefectures. Ayer, hey, 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 F***ck your mother. Before he could finish his song, he ended it with a curse. After singing, shouting, and scolding, he finally felt a lot more comfortable in his heart. Yu Qianqiu began to calm down. He stood silently by the side of the 1,000-mile lake and gazed into the distance. The blush on his cheeks gradually faded away and returned to normal. On a tall magnolia tree not far away, pure white magnolia flowers bloomed all over the branches, bathing in the sunlight and gently swaying. Lady Mu, who was dressed in snow-white clothes, stood under the tree in a reserved manner. She looked even more delicate than Mulan, who was on the branch. Looking at the lonely silhouette by the lake, he hesitated for a long time before walking over. He came to the back of Yu Qianqiu and asked softly, "Mister, has the punishment envoy left? Will he come back?" His voice was trembling. She clearly saw what happened here just now. She saw what she shouldn't have seen, and heard what she shouldn't have heard. She used to be a demon king, so she was naturally more sensible than Hibiscus. Although she didn't know where Bai Changchun was going, she vaguely guessed that he wouldn't come back. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly. His calm face, which was facing the 1,000-mile lake, instantly changed and became covered with a layer of frost. A majestic, gloomy, and terrifying aura instantly erupted from his upright body and directly enveloped Lady Mu. Endless coldness, endless despair, endless death. All kinds of extremely terrifying negative emotions directly impacted Lady Mu's body and mind. Lady Mu almost instantly lost her desire to live and was about to suffocate. Trembling all over, she directly knelt on the ground and swayed. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked at Yu Qianqiu with infinite fear. She had never imagined that the amiable Mr. Yu would be so terrifying. Just the powerful aura erupting from his body was terrifying enough to kill her. Just how terrifying was the cultivation he was concealing? She had never seen such a terrifying aura in her life. Today was the first time in her life that the man in front of her suddenly made her feel that he was even more terrifying than the Lord Torture Envoy. Yu Qianqiu slowly turned around and stared at Lady Mu, who was kneeling on the ground. He said indifferently with no expression on his face, "The Lord Torture Envoy has left. Do you have any ideas?" No. I was just asking. I was wrong. Sir, please spare my life." Lady Mu's face was pale, but she forced herself not to collapse and tried hard to reply. She knew that she had asked something she shouldn't have. If she didn't explain clearly, the man in front of her could take her life at any time. It would be as easy as killing an ant. She didn't need to doubt him at all. From today onwards, I am the new torture envoy of the demon domain. Yu Qianqiu turned around and faced the 1,000-mile lake again. With his back facing Lady Mu, he said, "Do you have any objections?" Lady Mu trembled and bowed with difficulty. "I pay my respects to the Lord Torture Envoy." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly felt that the terrifying aura had suddenly become stronger. It was so strong that she didn't even have the slightest thought of resisting and directly fainted. When she woke up, she found that the sun was still high in the sky. Obviously, she hadn't fainted for long. She checked her physical condition and found that there was nothing wrong with her except for being a little weak. Obviously, the new Lord Torture Envoy had already spared her. She tilted her head and found that Yu Qianqiu was still standing by the lake. She immediately got up and knelt down. "Thank you, Lord Torture Envoy, for sparing my life. Lady Mu, you haven't given me a massage for a long time." Yu Qianqiu turned around and chuckled. Then he took off his clothes and jumped into the lake, swimming 2 rounds naked. Lady Mu was stunned. She couldn't get used to the Lord Torture Envoy's reaction, but she understood what he meant by a massage. She immediately walked to the lakeside and gently took off her clothes. In the blink of an eye, an alluring and delicate body appeared. She slowly walked into the lake and with a wave of her hand she smoothed out a half-exposed rock on the lake's surface. Yu Qianqiu turned around and swam back, lying directly on the rock. Half of his body was on the rock in the water, while the other half was exposed to the sun. Naked, Lady Mu leaned over and let him massage her slender fingers. She asked softly, "My lord, how's the strength?" Yu Qianqiu narrowed his eyes and grunted. He seemed to be enjoying it very much. His mind was filled with all sorts of nonsense. "I don't have to be cautious in Shantian Island anymore. I'm in charge of my territory, how great." His head, which was resting on his arms, tilted over and said, "When you're free, go find the Demon King and the Ghost King to get some fresh fruits. Use a little more strength." "Yes." Lady Mu didn't show any abnormality on her face, but she was filled with caution and reverence in her heart. She was ready to sacrifice herself at any time, but Yu Qianqiu didn't seem to have any intention of touching her at all. After Bai Changchun left, the demon domain became someone's territory. Someone immediately turned the sky upside down and created an unprecedented scene in the demon domain. Sunbathing in the 1,000-mile lake and being massaged by beauties. Such a simple life. The big house in the center of the island silently watched the lively scene by the lake. The open door seemed to be letting out a soundless roar. In the territory of the Wuxia Empire, the flames of war reached the sky. Wherever Shi Wenguang pointed his sword, the army was invincible. The imperial army didn't even have the strength to fight back. The overwhelming victory made Shi Wenguang's army very spirited. They played a triumphant song all the way. They attacked cities and conquered territories as if they were taking something out of their pocket, and the territory they occupied kept expanding. The imperial court had long been in a panic. They forcefully recruited able-bodied men to replenish the army that was constantly losing in an attempt to protect the shrinking territory. However, the empire was on the verge of collapse, and the hearts of the people were changing. Who could turn the tide for the rotten regime? The various sects in the Wuxia cultivation world watched coldly from the sidelines. They were somewhat curious as to why the Fuxian island hadn't taken any action yet. Could it be that they were just going to let the imperial power change in the secular world? When the news that Shi Wenguang's backer was Yu Qianqiu spread, the various sects came to a sudden realization. It was a critical moment. The Fuxian island had no choice but to swallow their anger. For a moment, the Fuxian island became the joke of the various sections. Back then they had unceremoniously expelled Yu Qianqiu from the sect. Now they were finally going to drink the bitter wine that they brewed themselves. However, the attention of the various sects quickly shifted away from this matter. No one cared about the war in the secular world anymore. This was because a piece of news suddenly spread from the various countries. Moreover, it spread like wildfire. It was hard for the Wuxia cultivation world not to know about it. The #1 expert in the world, Bai Changchun, was going to enter the mysterious East Holy Land. Since the news had spread, the ins and outs of the matter were quickly investigated. The various sects in the Wuxia cultivation world finally understood that the #1 expert in the world was from Wuxia. Moreover, he had been secretly protecting Wuxia. Therefore, the soul formation experts of the various countries hadn't made a move yet. However, once Bai Changchun left, the various countries would definitely launch an all-out attack on the Wuxia cultivation world. For a moment, the various sects in Wuxia panicked. They knew that their good days were coming to an end. At this moment, the various countries were forcefully restraining their disciples. They strictly ordered them not to cause any trouble. Otherwise they would be severely punished. This was because Bai Changchun's temper was very scary. At this critical moment of his departure, it was possible that he would swiftly reorganize the cultivation world by dealing with the aftermath. This was not just a rumor. It was very possible. Whenever something involved Bai Changchun, the commotion caused would make everyone tremble in fear for a long time. Therefore, no one wanted to provoke Bai Changchun at this moment. For a moment, the entire cultivation world had a rare peace. Everyone was polite and lived in harmony. However, there was also a place that was not peaceful. Within the borders of Lingfang Valley, all the disciples of Lingfang Valley, together with the thousands of Wen clan disciples that Wen Lanfeng brought, spent a few days searching back and forth within Lingfang Valley several times. They almost turned over every barren mountain and remote corner. However, to Lu Yanqing's disappointment, Xn Laosan and Yen Zhuixing, who had stolen the 7-star blood orchid, seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Not even a trace of them could be found. Chapter 705. In fact, both Lu Yanqing and Wen Lanfeng knew that Yen Zhuixing and Xn Laosan had probably escaped. Even if they didn't escape, they couldn't find them under such a large-scale search. The hope of finding them again was slim. However, Xn Laosan refused to give up. He led the disciples of Lingfang Valley and Wen family to continue searching frantically. Everyone could understand his feelings. 3 of his brothers had died and one of them might even die. How could he not be anxious? At the peak of the herb hut, 2 figures stood in front of the cliff under the setting sun. One was tall, the other graceful. The lush Lingfang Valley was dyed with a layer of red and yellow by the setting sun. For the next few days, Lu Yanqing stood here most of the time, looking at the deserted Lingfang Valley with a frown. When Lanfeng sighed softly, "Yanqing, since it's already happened, let's get over it." The eldest, 2nd, 4th, 8th and 9th are all anxious. I'm useless as a master. I can't even protect the disciples under my nose. I'm sorry. If it wasn't for the eldest, 2nd, 4th and 8th going out to collect herbs recently, I'm afraid. Lu Yanqing shook her head in pain. When Lanfeng comforted her, "It's not your fault. Who knew that after Yen Zhuixing escaped from Cornucopia, he would hide in your Lingfang Valley? Otherwise he would have attracted a group of people to hunt him down. How could we allow him to cause trouble here? No, it's all my fault." Lu Yanqing muttered to herself, "If I didn't stop Yu Qianqiu at Cornucopia, there wouldn't be today." Do you remember what Yu Qianqiu said at that time? He said, "You let the people of Ice Palace go today. If the people of Ice Palace hurt Lingfang Valley in the future, I hope you won't regret it." Ah. She looked back at Wen Lanfeng with a sad smile and said, "It's really a prophecy." Unfortunately, he was right. Wen Lanfeng, don't you think I deserve it? Wen Lanfeng was startled. That's not true. Don't listen to that guy's nonsense. Speaking of Yu Qianqiu, Lu Yanqing seemed to have thought of something. Her self-reproachful expression became a little more restrained, and she said in a bleak tone, "I reckon that Lao San is no longer in the Lingfang Valley. Let your Wen family's disciples withdraw. Bai Changchun is about to leave, and many people are rushing to see him off. You should also go and see him off. Let's keep looking. If you don't look for it, then there's no hope of finding it." Wen Lanfeng tactfully refused. In fact, he also wanted to take this opportunity to accompany Lu Yanqing. Seeing that Lu Yanqing still wanted to persuade him, he couldn't help but smile and said, "Everyone knows what those people who are going to send Bai Changchun off are thinking. They just want to personally see Bai Changchun enter the Eastern Sacred Land so that they can plan for the future. Otherwise, they won't be able to eat or sleep well. I won't join in the fun, lest Bai Changchun misunderstands." Lu Yanqing paused for a moment and nodded slightly. As the 2 of them chatted, they began to guess who would succeed as the Demon Realm's torture master. Under the night sky, in the vast land of Di Rong Kingdom, there were undulating mountains. Some were steep, some were tall and some were flat. Under the cover of the white snow, they had lost their edges and corners, forming a gentle and beautiful white curve. The bright moonlight reflected off the pure white snow, forming a silver light all over the mountains. This was a world of snow, and the cultivation world called this place the Great Snow Mountain. On the highest peak of the towering mountain, a majestic palace made of ice stood tall. Under the moonlight, the ice palace was sparkling, showing off its cold and poignant beauty on the peak of the mountain. And this seemingly cold ice palace, in fact, was loose on the outside but tense on the inside. The 6 disciples of Bing Chengzi were carefully watching the outside of the palace, and Third XN was among them. Yen Bugui anxiously paced back and forth in the palace. He was able to come here thanks to the 2 disciples of Bing Chengzi, a group of disciples of the Ice Palace, and a group of old subordinates who risked their lives to escort him out of the limitless island. However, the moment he arrived here, he coincidentally saw Yen Juexing, who was personally escorted by Bing Chengzi. It was a good thing for a father and son to meet each other, but Yen Juexing's appearance really shocked Yen Bugui. His son looked haggard and had lost an arm, which instantly made Yen Bugui's heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. He had nothing now. His home was gone and the limitless island was gone. If his son was gone, he really didn't know where to go. Bing Chengzi had brought Yen Juexing into the secret room for 3 whole days, and there was no news at all. How could he not be anxious? Below the ice palace, in the secret room deep inside the mountain, it was covered by a soundproof enchantment. At this moment, inside the soundproof enchantment, the smell of blood was so strong that it was pungent, and there was an endless mournful scream, which made one's hair stand on end. Bing Chengzi looked at Yen Juexing, who was in a small blood pool in front of him with a solemn face. The one who was screaming was none other than Yen Juexing himself. Yen Juexing's naked body was soaked in the blood pool, and the blood had submerged up to his chest. He was crazily shaking his head and screaming in the blood pool. His face was hideous and he seemed to be in extreme pain. At the place where one of his arms was cut off, more than half of his arm had already grown out. At the place where his arm was cut off, there were red granules wriggling disgustingly, like a pile of earthworms, which was disgusting to look at. He was using the blood demon body refining technique to regrow his lost arm. Even though Bing Chengzi had a firm mind, after listening to Yen Juexing's mournful scream for a whole day, he couldn't help but frown. However, for Yen Juexing's safety, he had to protect him personally. He really couldn't let any accidents happen to him. Speaking of which, he had to thank Bai Changchun for successfully saving Yen Juexing this time. If it wasn't for Bai Changchun going to the East Holy Land and keeping all the forces quiet, it would have been really difficult for him to successfully bring Yen Juexing back. After receiving the distress message from Yen Juexing, who was forced into a corner, he rushed over at top speed. Coincidentally, the Spirit Fang Valley was conducting a large-scale search of the mountain. The seriously injured Yen Juexing was hiding here and there, not knowing where to hide. Bing Chengzi's timely appearance resolved the crisis. With his profound cultivation, he quietly brought Yen Juexing back. In fact, Yen Juexing had to thank Third Xian for escaping capture. If it wasn't for Third Xian's familiarity with the terrain of the Spirit Fang Valley and helping Yen Juexing hold on until Bing Chengzi arrived, he would still be in trouble. Speaking of which, Bing Chengzi still had to thank one person, and that was Wen Lanfeng. Fortunately, Wen Lanfeng only cared about Lu Yanqing and kept her company. If Wen Lanfeng had also participated in the search of the mountain, Bing Chengzi's movements would probably not have escaped Wen Lanfeng's notice. All these coincidences could only mean that Yen Juexing was not fated to die. A day later, the scream in the secret room disappeared. In the blood pool, Yen Juexing, who was covered in blood, opened his healthy arms and laughed wildly without concealment. After calming down, Yen Juexing bowed to Bing Chengzi and said, "Thank you for saving me, master. Otherwise, Juexing would not have been able to escape. You should have used the protective jade pendant I gave you earlier. Why did you have to use it only when you had no other choice?" Bing Chengzi casually scolded him and did not say much. But then he slightly frowned and said, "Your cultivation? Why did it drop?" Although the blood demon body refining technique has the magical function of reattaching broken limbs, it also causes great damage to the cultivation. It is expected that my cultivation would drop from the middle stage of crossing calamity to the early stage. But I hate it. If it wasn't for Yu Qianqiu, how could I do this? Yen Juexing suddenly opened his arms and roared madly, "Yu Qianqiu, I will not let you go." Unfortunately, Yu Qianqiu could not hear this sentence. Otherwise, he would definitely jump up and say, "Who's afraid of who?" Because he did not expect Yen Juexing to let him go. Since they were sworn enemies, he would continue to fight to the death. In the big house of the demon ghost region, Yu Qianqiu was lying on the ground, but there was an elastic thigh under his head, which belonged to Miss Mu. At this time, Miss Mu was carrying a plate of red fruits, picking them one by one and sending them to Yu Qianqiu's mouth. The latter smacked his lips a few times, waved his hand to stop the hands that continued to send him red fruits, and got up with a sigh. He leaned against the door frame weakly, spat out the fruit skin and looked around aimlessly. He was really bored out of his wits. He had no choice. Although there were beauties serving him and his life was comfortable, there were only 2 people on the island. After a few days he found that he was bored out of his mind. As a new official, he also wanted to guard the demon ghost region majestically like Bai Changchun and have a taste of being a torture envoy. But now he found that it was a mistake to learn from Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun could stay here year after year, but he found that he lost his patience after only a few days. How was this different from being in jail? In jail, many of his cellmates would brag, but Miss Mu was not one to brag. I wonder if Master has left? Yu Qianqiu leaned against the door frame like a resentful woman and muttered to himself, then disappeared. Teleportation. Miss Mu's expression turned serious. The new torture envoy had indeed concealed his cultivation on purpose. He was not as superficial as he usually appeared, but had hidden his strength well. In the vast East Sea there was an island named Xianxian. It was the territory of Nanming Ancestor, one of the 4 great men of the cultivation world. It was shrouded in smoke all year round, and the red light shone without end, and the sound of knocking could be heard. On the main peak of Xianxian Island, Bai Changchun, dressed in a green robe, stood alone with his hands behind his back. His eyes were slightly closed on his thin face. He was waiting quietly, waiting for the opening of the East Holy Land. Suddenly he opened his eyes and slowly turned around. He frowned and said, "What are you doing here?" A person suddenly appeared behind him. At this moment he was frozen on the spot like a fossil, not moving at all. Even his eyeballs could not move. This person was none other than Yu Qianqiu. After finding his master's location, he had just appeared, and before he could react, he immediately discovered that the surrounding air currents had suddenly moved. They pressed down on him like metal, making him unable to move. He did not even have a chance to resist. This was because Bai Changchun had discovered it early. Otherwise, if someone had suddenly appeared behind him and he did not stop in time, Yu Qianqiu might have become a meat patty. The air currents that clamped down on him loosened, and Yu Qianqiu regained his freedom. He quickly panted and said, "Master, I'm here to send you off. Why did you attack me?" He was full of resentment, and it felt like his kindness was taken as malicious intent. However, he did not think about it. In this world, who could get close to Bai Changchun without being discovered? He had suddenly appeared out of thin air in Utopia and got close to Bai Changchun. Thus, Bai Changchun had subconsciously treated him as an expert and reacted immediately. Luckily, he had stopped in time and did not cause any mishaps. Bai Changchun had never wasted his breath on such topics, and he could not be bothered to explain to him. He asked expressionlessly, "Is this the miraculous effect you mentioned when you gave me those silver balls?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.